The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Crash of 2016. This is page 34. Prior to this, we've set up how conservatives saw the 60s as a time of great social chaos and the rise of Ralph Nader and Rachel Carlson and whole consumer and environmental movements as threats to profitability and business, and they had to do something about it. So page 34. Lewis F. Powell, Jr. was just sitting down to breakfast in his suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City when he received a call from the White House. The year was 1971, more than 40 years since the last great crash. The 60s had ended and the Vietnam War had destroyed the Democratic Party, leaving Richard Nixon as President of the United States. And Nixon needed a favor. A thin, ascetic man with wispy hair and fragile features, Lewis Powell had ancestral roots in America's first European settlement, Jamestown, and a lifetime of participation in the law. He deeply loved his Richmond, Virginia home and the law practice he had there, which mostly consisted of defending corporate interests and wealthy Southern white men. He walked comfortably, often in crepe-soled shoes, dressed as a Southern gentleman, and spoke so softly that people sometimes leaned forward to listen. But when he spoke, his words were precise, well-measured, and carefully considered. He was one of the most brilliant jurists of his day, and so it's no surprise that the Nixon White House was considering him for a seat on the Supreme Court, a job he turned down at first. But then when Nixon called him again at the Waldorf Astoria, he reluctantly accepted. As a Supreme Court justice, Lewis Powell was very much the moderate, and his legacy on the high court would reflect his balanced and authentic interpretation of the rule of law in America. However, just a few months before he was nominated by Nixon, Powell had written a memo to his good friend Eugene Sindor, Jr., the director of the United States Chamber of Commerce at the time. And Powell's most indelible mark on our nation was not to be his 15-year tenure as a Supreme Court justice, but instead that memo, which served as a declaration of war, a war by the economic royalists against both democracy and what they saw as an overgrown middle class. It would be a final war, a bella omnium contra omnis, against everything the New Deal and the Great Society had accomplished. It wasn't until September 1972, 10 months after the Senate confirmed Powell, that the public first found out about the Powell memo. The actual document had the word confidential stamped on it, a sign that Powell himself hoped it would never see daylight outside of the rarefied circles of his rich friends. By then, however, it had already found its way to the desks of CEOs all across the nation and was, with millions in corporate and billionaire money, already being turned into real actions, policies, and institutions. During its investigation into Powell as part of the nomination process, the FBI never found the memo, but investigative journalist Jack Anderson did, and he exposed it in a September 28, 1972 column titled, "Powell's Lessons to Business Aired." Anderson wrote, shortly before his appointment to the Supreme Court, Justice Lewis F. Powell, Jr. urged business leaders in a confidential memo to use the courts as a social, economic, and political instrument. Pointing out that the memo wasn't discovered until after Powell was confirmed by the Senate, Anderson wrote, senators never got a chance to ask Powell whether he might use his position on the Supreme Court to put his ideas into practice and to influence the court on behalf of business interests. This was an explosive charge being leveled at the nation's rookie Supreme Court justice, a man entrusted with interpreting our nation's laws with absolute impartiality. But Jack Anderson was no stranger to taking on American authority and no stranger to the consequences of his journalism. He'd exposed scandals from the Truman, Eisenhower, Nixon, and later the Reagan administrations. He was a true investigative journalist. In his report on the memo, Anderson wrote, Powell recommended a militant political action program ranging from the courts to the campuses. Powell's memo was both a direct response to Roosevelt's battle cry decades earlier and a response to the tumult of the 1960s. He wrote, quote, no thoughtful person can question that the American economic system is under broad attack, end quote. When Sindor and the chamber received the Powell memo, corporations were growing tired of their second-class status in America. Even though the previous 40 years had been a time of great growth and strength for the American economy and America's middle-class workers, and a time of sure and steady increases in profits for corporations, CEOs felt something was missing. If they could only find a way to wiggle back into the people's minds who were just beginning to forget the Royalists' previous exploits in the 1920s that had crashed our economy, then they could get their tax cuts back. They could trash the burdensome regulations that were keeping the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat safe. And the banksters among them could inflate another massive economic bubble to make themselves all mind-bogglingly rich. It could, if done right, be a return to the roaring 20s. But how could they do this? How could they convince Americans to take another shot at what was widely considered a dangerous free market ideology and economic framework, and that Americans once knew preceded every great crash and war? But Lewis Powell had an answer, and he reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, the hub of corporate power in America, with a strategy. As Powell wrote, strength lies in organization, in careful long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, in the scale of financing available only through joint effort, and in the political power available only through unified action and national organizations. Thus, Powell said, the role of the National Chamber of Commerce is therefore vital. And out of the Powell memo came all these think tanks and judicial programs, college campus programs. He reshaped America, and it led directly to the Buckley versus Vallejo decision.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, the big lie is alive and well. You know the big lie. Yes, I'm going to violate Godwin's law, but I'm not the first person to do it. The big lie, of course, tell a really big lie and repeat it a lot, and eventually, well, actually, you know, one of our presidents who was intimately familiar with this because he fought a war against a country that went to war based on the big lie explains it even better than me. Here he is.
Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf.
Can we start that over again? I can't even hear that. I'm not sure. Have we figured out where in the audio chain our problem is?
A book,
And
Mein Kampf.
okay, so let's just start that over again, Chris, please. Remember, a couple of years ago there was a book. It's titled Mein Kampf. This is Franklin Roosevelt.
Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself. The technique was all set out in Hitler's book, and it was copied by the aggressors of Italy and Japan. According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood, always a big one, for its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
This is the famous Fala speech in September or August of 1944 that Franklin Roosevelt gave that speech. And to see it at work, right? The Republicans yesterday in the House of Representatives voted for a roughly $600 billion tax cut over the next 10 years on people whose income is over $300,000 a year. There's a small addition to the ordinary income tax, but there's a large addition, almost a 20% increase in the capital gains tax. 3.8% was added on to the 20%, which is the top capital gains rate, which is nearly 20, it's about an 18% increase in the capital gains tax. And who pays the capital gains tax at that level, at the very top level? only very, 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 very rich people. And that capital gains tax, that additional 18% increase in the capital gains tax is generating the 60 to $100 billion a year necessary to pay for the subsidies in Obamacare that allow you and your friends and working people and people on the low end of the income scale to either get subsidies for Obamacare or to get Medicaid. That's what it is all about. And the whole reason for everything the Republicans did yesterday was to cut that tax on their donor class. That was it. That's all they were interested in doing, and they had to do that first because then they're going to go on to tax reform, in quotes, which is cutting even more taxes for billionaires, like doing away with the alternative minimum tax and doing away with the estate tax. But first they had to get rid of this tax under the guise of health care. And so in the process of doing that, I mean, once you gut Obamacare of $600 billion, you can't cover everybody. And you've got to dial back the quality of coverage, right? So, but you can't let people know that. As Franklin Roosevelt said, you've got to stick to that big lie. Here's Donald Trump yesterday from the Rose Garden.
It's been a catastrophe, and this is a great plan. I actually think it will get even better, and this is, make no mistake, this is a repeal and a replace of Obamacare. Make no mistake about it. Make no mistake. And I think most importantly, yes, premiums will be coming down. Yes, deductibles will be coming down.
No.
But very importantly, it's a great plan. And
No.
ultimately, that's what it's all about. We knew that wasn't going to work. I predicted it a long time ago. I said it's failing. And now it's obvious that it's failing. It's dead. It's
Talking about
essentially
Obamacare.
dead. If we don't pay lots of ransom money over to the insurance companies, it would die immediately. So what we have is something very, very incredibly well-crafted.
Right. And then here's Paul Ryan echoing the big lie, just like FDR said, Hitler said, you've got to do it. You've got to repeat that big lie over and over and over again. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan.
The truth is, this law has failed and it is collapsing.
Talking
Premiums
about
are
Obamacare
skyrocketing and
again.
choices are disappearing. And it is only getting worse, spiraling out of control.
Thanks to Marco
And that
Rubio.
is why we have to repeal this law and put in place a real, vibrant marketplace with competition and lower premiums for families.
Right.
That's what the American Health Care Act is all about.
No.
It makes health care more affordable.
No.
It takes care of our most vulnerable.
No.
And it shifts power from Washington back to the states, and most importantly,
No.
back to you, the patient.
No.
Like I said, we've got a lot of work to do. But one thing is now clear. Republicans are committed to keeping our promise to
No.
lift the burden of Obamacare from the American people and put in place a better, more patient-centered system.
Right. You get it? I mean, it's like it is the big lie. There's just no other way to describe it. It's the friggin' big lie. This strategy. And the Republicans went into this. The donor class has been hysterical about a 18% increase in the income tax that they're paying, the capital gains tax that they're paying. And so, billionaires like the Kochs, they funded those creepy Uncle Sam ads back when Obamacare was first rolling out. They fought Obamacare tooth and nail. Americans for Prosperity and all these other Koch front groups have been attacking Obamacare day after day after day after day. Marco Rubio poison-pilled it 2 years ago, which is causing some insurance companies to pull out of the exchanges, as was trumpeted. When Republicans, it sounds like they're complaining. Actually, they're bragging. They're bragging about the fact that there's going to be nobody offering health insurance on the exchanges in the state of Iowa. Well, does that mean that nobody can buy health insurance? No. It just means the exchange isn't working. But anybody can, buy. You can buy health insurance from Blue Cross. You can buy it from Aetna. You can buy it from, all the big companies. They do business in all 50 states. So it's not like people can't buy health insurance and can't get the subsidies on Obamacare. It's just that the Republican governor of Iowa is letting the exchange collapse, essentially. So it's the big lie. When are we going to acknowledge this? When is the corporate media going to acknowledge this? Have you heard even once on any television network? You're definitely not going to hear it on Fox. I mean, there's just this this hysterical clip over at Media Matters of what happens, when Juan Williams actually tried to tell the truth about what's going on. This is during their show, The Five. And I'm just going to play the audio from this because I can play it out of my computer, and Chris hasn't queued it up for the video. My fault, not Chris's. But just listen to this. I mean, here's Juan Williams just trying to tell the truth, and they just pile on him. No, you can't say that. The rubes are watching. The suckers are watching. We've got to keep them inside the bubble. Here it is.
You know what? I hope it covers mental illness because we're seeing a lot of it at the table tonight. A lot of people
Nicely done.
Oh
Come
my
on,
God,
Juan.
this is great. This is a victory for Trump. Like a dose of reality, just, the doctor's prescription. This is a fraud. This is a guy who didn't get anything done, no legislative accomplishment in the first 100 days, desperate for something that he can call a victory. He gets pressure on everybody from the
Why are
Heritage
Democrats so
Foundation
hysterical
to the
today if
Senate,
nothing happens?
all the way to Paul Ryan, and says you must do this. Ryan Priebus pushing this like it's his life depending on it. But here's the details you have not heard about America. Uninsured, more uninsured people. Remember, I'm going to give you something that covers everybody. Better?
Those are people that
Guess
don't
what?
want to sign
Hold
up
on.
for insurance.
I know.
If you're young and
that's
healthy,
not
you
true.
don't have to buy it because you're not mandated.
Jesse
to
Waters
sign up.
lying.
Let me just tell you something.
That's the truth.
What about this? If you're a senior in this country, so many older people voted for President Trump. Guess what? Now you can be charged 5 times more for your medical
What about my
coverage.
home state of
What
Arizona?
about this?
That
What
the
about
premiums are up
Medicare?
over 100.
What about the seniors
Oh
that
my
paid
God.
116%
Juan
more for
Williams
their
trying to tell the
premiums in
truth.
Arizona?
Let me just tell you something.
We can't have that.
Honestly,
Shut him down.
my home state
Medicare
has
and
been hit the
hospitals
hardest by
now,
far.
hospitals are going to pay more for Medicare. What about the poor?
Okay, well,
paying more for
I
premiums
want
and deductibles?
It goes on for another 2 minutes, but you get the idea, right? This is how Fox plays it because they're the official propaganda organ of the Republican Party. Fox was first proposed to Richard Nixon when Roger Ailes worked in the Nixon White House. He called it GOP TV. Richard Nixon couldn't raise the money to make it happen, so Ailes just kind of sat on. This is all in my book, The Crash of 2016, all the details. It's why Fox won't even let me come on anymore to debate people because I got a whole chapter about Roger Ailes in there. Finally, he finds a billionaire, Rupert Murdoch, who goes, yeah, I'll do this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So GOP TV and the right-wing hate radio keeping the big lie alive. Can the Republicans do that? Are they going to be successful? And welcome back. By the way, it's Anything Goes Friday, so any topic you want to talk about. I just had to start out with the thing that's making me crazy. I wanted to share that with you. But Steve in Lansing, Michigan, watching Free Speech TV on his Roku box. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. The first-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank
Love
you.
what you do. Read a lot of your books. Mainly, I would just like to announce that we formed the first cannabis caucus of the Michigan Democratic Party. And we were granted charter on May 1st.
Wow, what is a candidates caucus?
The cannabis.
Oh, cannabis. Oh, good. So,
Yes,
so you now have a group
we-
within the Democratic Party that is committed to advancing, presumably, decriminalization, complete legalization of marijuana, recreational marijuana in Michigan?
Yes, not only that, but also advocating for patient rights, caregiver rights, cannabis worker rights.
Right.
And then we're just trying to open that up to the democratic process. And the Michigan Democratic Party has really accepted us.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it's winning politics. I mean, it's just absolutely winning politics. I don't know if you saw this piece on Alternet this morning by Phil Smith, but more Americans, here's 7 quick statistics. Let me share them with you, Steve. Maybe you can use this stuff. More Americans have tried marijuana than not. 133 million adults have tried pot. 115 million have not. Some 55 million adults smoked pot in the last year. That's over nearly a quarter of our population. A solid majority of Americans, 56%, say marijuana use is socially acceptable. Pot smokers don't bother to hide it anymore. A whopping 95% reported that their significant other or their friends know about their use of pot. If people don't use, number 5, if people don't use marijuana, it's usually not because it's illegal. Only 27% said they didn't use pot because it was illegal. 26% said they didn't use it because they didn't like it. 16% thought it wasn't healthy. 9% said that they couldn't do it because of work or school reasons. 6% simply had no interest. 5% cited family reasons. So, you know, even the illegality is not stopping anybody. Number 6, very few marijuana users say they use it because it's fun. 37% say they use it to relax, 19% for pain relief, 10% to be social, 6% to be creative, 3% to improve sex or sleep, and 5% for other reasons. Only 16% said that they use pot because it's fun. And a strong majority, 70% of Americans, say that pot is less harmful than alcohol. 76% of Americans say pot is less harmful than tobacco. 67% of Americans say that pot is less dangerous than opiates. If I said more dangerous or less harmful than opiates. So there's some ammunition for you, Steve.
Oh, yeah, that's very helpful, and I appreciate your platform for putting that out there. And, yeah, I think a lot of the just propaganda and misconceptions are being debunked now as people experience it firsthand or family members.
Do you have a website in Michigan for the Democratic Marijuana Caucus? Cannabis Caucus?
We are the Cannabis Caucus of Michigan on Facebook. But we also, if I can do a quick plug, our first meeting, which is open to the public, will be May 9th at Henry's Place in Okemos. It's 4926 Marsh Road.
Okay, great. Henry's Place on May 9th in Okemos at what time?
At 7:30 p.m.
At 7:30 p.m. Cool. Steve, good luck on that, and good on you. Congratulations. That's absolutely brilliant what you've done. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. It is Anything Goes Friday today. Garland Gilchrist is going to drop by. He's running for the city clerk in Detroit. He's going to drop by toward the end of this hour. And David Wood is going to be with us at the very top of the next hour. Jan Frell from Alternet might drop by. So we've got a few people who are going to just drop in and say a few words. But by and large, it's Anything Goes Friday. So whatever's on your mind, whether it's that burning question, are all the staffers on the Thom Hartmann Show lizard people? Nate's favorite question for people to call in on, right? Or all the people in the White House lizard people. I don't know. Anything's possible. Hey, there's a big eclipse coming in June, I think it is. An eclipse of the sun, a total eclipse of the sun. It's going to cross the United States it's going to start in Portland, Oregon, or in that, the Pacific Northwest and end up kind of over Atlanta, Georgia. Does that herald something? What does that mean to you? The ancients had some serious thoughts about eclipses. Is that going to mean that's the time to get out of the stock market? Is that going to mean that that's the time that the impeachment of Donald Trump begins? I mean, who knows? Anyhow, lots going on. And let's pick up your calls. John in Naperville, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom, love your show. First-time caller.
Thank you.
I attended a town hall meeting with my Democratic representative, Bill Foster, and the reason he was not for Medicare for all, and two of the reasons he gave was he was concerned about the level of care. He made an example that people could demand to go to the Mayo Clinic, which I don't think is a very rational talking point, but that's what he said. Also,
it is not a rational talking point.
Yes, I didn't think it was rational.
There's no basis for that. Number one, if the Mayo Clinic is offering services at the same price as anybody else, yeah, you could go to the Mayo Clinic, and there's nothing wrong with that. The Mayo Clinic actually does cost control better than most hospitals because it's not for profit and because all the doctors are paid on a salary rather than on a fee basis. So their costs, the Mayo Clinic may be one of the most cost-effective hospital operations in the United States, number one, right up there with Kaiser. And number two, if it turns out that what they're charging is a lot more than the same procedures in other places, you can get the same procedures in other places. I mean, it's really simple. So what was his second point?
His other one was about funding it. He just he wasn't sure how it would be paid for and who would be taxed. And I feel that was a weak talking point by him.
Yeah.
But the majority of the supporters there didn't know how to answer it.
Right. We're already paying for health care. We just don't call it taxes, although a lot of it is taxes because we're paying, we're paying for emergency room visits. That was something that Reagan put into law in 1986, that if you show up at an emergency room, you can't be turned away. And if you can't afford to pay, all of us pay for it. And that's what's happening with people who are uninsured, is what could have been, a $50 doctor's visit to deal with an infection when it was small or to deal with a lump when it was stage 1 becomes a $5,000 ER visit when that infection has taken off half a person's finger or when that lump is now metastasized. And John, I would go to opensecrets.org and just see if your member of Congress is getting money from the healthcare industry, or the health insurance industry, excuse me. The healthcare industry is generally in favor of single payer. The health insurance industry, of course, is opposed to it.
All right, thanks, Tom.
All right, good luck, John. Let me know what you find out if you do. How much time do we have? Just a little over a minute. Maine in Chicago. Maine, you want to make a quick point? We got a minute, a little over a minute.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not quick, but my thing is reparations over the wall. And because I feel that we as a people haven't got our reparations from, the days of slavery. And because of that, we're a people like we are now. If you work by a man making $10, $15, $20 an hour and you're getting nothing, and you get this nothing for the next 300 plus years, now where would you think you would be as a people? When the Judeans had left Egypt, they took the wealth of Egypt with us. Okay, we go to the Second World War when the Hitler took their money, and now a few years ago, we helped them get their money out of the Swiss banks with interest. And then you have here in America where we have some Indian tribes with casinos on their reservations. So they're getting some kinds of money. Now, people think that we don't need, like black people don't need money. If we had the money, we can stand as other people in this world. Because,
Maine, I totally agree with you. I'm in favor of reparations. I think a small step in the right direction was the Great Society, but that was not even, laid out as reparations. I totally agree with you. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything Goes Friday. Whatever's on your mind, give us a shout. We'll be right back.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader, which is excerpts from other books that I've written. This excerpt is from Threshold. And it starts out, we're on page 239. It starts out with, I went to Corral, Peru. It's a town that, or the first mother city, the first original city that has ever been discovered intact. It's 5,000 years old. It has been buried for 4,000 years. It was just excavated in the last decade. I went down to Peru. We did our radio show from there. And I met with Dr. Ruth Shady, who is the anthropologist and archaeologist who's running this. And she said, well, as we sat and ate, I asked her what was the most significant fact about Corral. Here, she said, the civilization was different, contrasting the Corral of 5,000 years ago with the city-states that were emerging in Egypt, India, and Asia at that time. The focus of the culture here was different. When this civilization was formed here, peace was very important. There was no war. She paused and looked at me with a glint in her eye. Why? Why was there no war? She asked, as if quizzing me. It turns out they found this city that had been there for 1,000 years, and there wasn't a single instrument of war or violence anywhere in the city. Music, dancing, flutes, amphitheaters, no war. So then we jump to page 244. Are we innately evil or good, warlike or peaceful? In 1634, in his book Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes stated our culture's assumption of the essentially evil nature of humans, saying that life without the iron fist of church or state would be war of every man against every man, resulting in a society where life is poor, nasty, brutish, and short. A generation later, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Locke challenged Hobbes, suggesting that evidence from tribes being discovered across Africa and the Americas by European explorers demonstrated that instead, the natural state of humankind was good, egalitarian, and peaceful. The thinking of Rousseau and Locke explicitly and overtly influenced the founders of the United States, particularly Thomas Jefferson, who saw verification in it in his own contact with Native Americans. Thus began America as an egalitarian experiment, an experiment that has been expanded and developed by nearly 100 other nations in the world that claim democracy, particularly the countries of Northern Europe, where once feared and warlike people, most notably the Vikings of Norway and Sweden, are now among the happiest and most peaceful and self-sufficient people in the world. Yet the Hobbeses of the world are currently ascendant in terms of both war on humans and war on the environment. But what should be done? As I said in Leonardo DiCaprio's environmental documentary, The 11th Hour, the problem is not a problem of technology. The problem is not a problem of too much carbon dioxide. The problem is not a problem of global warming. The problem is not a problem of waste. All of those things are symptoms of the problem. The problem is the way that we are thinking. The problem is fundamentally a cultural problem. It's at the level of our culture that this illness is happening. In my books, I've shared stories from all around the world of cultures that have matured, awakened, and found ways to live in peace, harmony, and ecological balance, and the fate of others that have not. Some are pre-city, Aboriginal and tribal people. Some are modern communities. Some are fully developed city-states moving quickly in the direction of peace. All offer us a new vision of how life can be in a world where the core assumptions of modern culture are challenged and modified. This is not a radical or new age or easily dismissed concept. It started with the Enlightenment of the 17th century. Its first experiment was the founding of the United States in the 18th century. Flawed, but a great experiment. It flowered throughout the world throughout the 19th century as nation after nation flipped from warrior king states to democracies. It found global acceptance in the 20th century with the foundation of the United Nations, the first international organization whose single explicit purpose was to create, promote, and maintain worldwide peace. And now in the 21st century, as war against both humans and against nature is increasingly being viewed with horror by people around the world, movements are springing up all over the planet to reject the immature cultural paradigms of the past and move us into a post-carbon, post-warfare, egalitarian, and peaceful world where there's room for both humans and for all other life. Then we start a chapter, why and when did war begin? If it's true, as scientists from Peter Farb to Rianne Eisler to Ruth Shady point out, that a prime differentiator between war societies and peaceful societies is the role of power relationships between men and women, the question is raised, why and when does war begin, and how is it related to the relationship between the sexes? Most pre-literate cultures, from those in the Arctic to those in the southernmost tips of South America and Africa, were largely peaceful before contact with technology and our culture. While there was conflict, and often violent conflict, it rarely reached the proportions of organized, sustained, legally sanctioned mass murder that we today refer to as war. As the anthropologist Peter Farb has documented, some Native American societies, for example, the Shoshone, didn't even have a word for war in their vocabulary. Others used organized games to resolve conflicts. Many theories have been put forward for how and why the warrior mentality took over. And then, it goes on to whether this started with animal husbandry or whether it started with agriculture, where did war begin, and some interesting stuff. So it's in the Thom Hartmann Reader.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Anything Goes Friday. Casey in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Casey, what's up?
Tom, how you been, buddy?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good. I want to back you up a little bit. Let's go back to 2009. All right, when the Democrats had the House and the Senate, they had everything. When they did the health care bill, they allowed the Republicans to pick out all the good regulation that protected the consumer. The Democrats blew it back in 2009. They didn't.
Well, there are a lot of good regulations made it through that protected the consumer. The main thing and it wasn't basically the Republicans that fought him on it. It was Joe Lieberman was the public option.
Well, yeah, not only that, but the thing is, though, is they allowed the Republicans to pick out the biggest part was the insurance companies allowed to jack up rates. There was no protection to the consumer.
No, they did. They put it. The rates based on age cannot be more than 3 times. You can't have a multiplier greater than 3. The Republicans just changed that to 5. So a 20-year-old and a 60-year-old, the 60-year-old could pay up to 3 times what the 20-year-old paid based on age. Under the Republican bill, the 60-year-old can pay 5 times what the 20-year-old pays based on age. But that's in Obamacare, and it's also, less generously in what the Republicans are proposing.
Right, but Tom, the biggest thing is the Democrats had the House and the Senate. They had everything, and the president.
They had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate for 74 legislative days, and they got a lot done. They got a hell of a lot done during those 74 days. And I used to have a little card or a sheet around here that had the whole list of it.
I just feel. I think a lot of people feel that
in those 74 days, the Democrats passed the largest tax cut on the middle class in the history of the United States. They saved Chrysler. They saved GM. And by the way, those loans have been repaid. They reversed 800,000 monthly job losses and turned them into job gains. They increased education spending. They decreased the cost of student loans by almost half. They strengthened the hate crime laws. They passed the Affordable Care Act, which was huge. They expanded the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIPS. They reformed the child labor laws. They reformed Wall Street with Dodd-Frank. They reformed credit card practices with the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. They stopped predatory lending to our troops. They put in a provision that allowed troops to be paid for stop-loss time, which Bush had stopped. They stopped torture by law. They passed a law. They increased Veterans Administration spending and massively reformed the VA. They changed the law so that women could serve on submarines and would have equal pay across the board. They passed a major nuclear arms reduction and disposal bill, which, by the way, we collaborated with the Russians on that to make that happen. BP, they passed legislation forcing BP to kick in $20 billion to clean up the Gulf, which saved taxpayers $20 billion. They strengthened the EPA. They broadened the powers of the Food and Drug Administration. They got funding for the 9/11 responders, health care, which Republicans had been fighting ever since they exploited the 9/11 responders on 9/11. And they repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That in 74 days. After that, they didn't have a filibuster-proof Senate any longer. And so the rest of those 2 years, the Republicans obstructed absolutely everything they did, including trying to extend long-term unemployment benefits beyond the one-year emergency, trying to, Nancy Pelosi, a lot of great legislation got out of the House because they didn't lose control of the House.
I might disagree.
But it all got filibustered in the Senate. Nancy Pelosi's bill that said that we're going to do away with the tax incentives to move your jobs overseas. And we're going to provide you with tax incentives to move your factories back to the United States. The Republicans filibustered that. For example, I mean, I could give you a long list, Casey, but, I don't think that the Democrats squandered anything. I think what you're looking at is the caucus room conspiracy led by Jim DeMint and friends. Jim DeMint, by the way, just got kicked out at Heritage. There was a genuine good faith effort on the part of the Democratic Party and the Democrats, and not just an effort, some successes in those 74 days
to actually pass meaningful and consequential legislation. The Republicans then began successfully began the program that they planned the night of January 20th, 2009 in the Caucus Room restaurant right here in Washington, D.C., to obstruct Obama on absolutely everything. And that's the point at which, in my opinion, Harry Reid should have blown up the filibuster. But he didn't, and so we had 7 years, 6 years, where pretty much not much got done as a result of Republican obstruction, so that the Republicans could blame the Democrats for it. I mean, this is purely political, Casey.
Yeah,
I don't get why you're blaming the victims.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that, Tom. But the thing is, though, is that at that time, Obama was still getting lobbyists were still giving Obama the healthcare insurance companies were giving Obama checks. And Democrats, that's the big.
Well, health insurance companies are giving everybody checks. They, pharma and the health insurance lobbies are in aggregate the most powerful lobby here in Washington D.C. And yeah, they give everybody checks. I mean, there's some people probably who don't take them. I'd be surprised if Bernie was, for example, or most of the members of the House of the Progressive Caucus. But that is allowed by law. And, it's up to individual members. And it may have something to do with why, in fact, probably why Joe Lieberman, fought the public option. He was the one vote that prevented that from getting out of committee. And to his eternal condemnation. But, Casey, I'm not buying it that the Democrats just failed. Nancy Pelosi was leading one of the most progressive houses throughout the first 2 years when she was Speaker of the House. And passed some of the most progressive legislation since the Great Society, since Lyndon Johnson. And I'm proud of what they did, and I will defend what they did. Casey, thanks for the call. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I had a thought after you had your conversation with your regular libertarian guest, Charles Sauer.
Yeah.
He was maintaining the position that the correct way to handle situations where people have suffered loss or damage or injury due to the bad conduct of another was by lawsuits in the courts.
Right.
And you correctly pointed out that that's not a remedy that's worth much to the injured party in a state like Texas, where they limit damages to $250,000.
Plus, it's not much good to an injured party if they're dead.
Yeah. But it also occurred to me that if that is his solution, that would mean that the government would have to require that everybody carry lawsuit insurance, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
In other words, because most people in the United States can't sustain a loss of $5,000, and 40% of our population lives paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
If you committed an injury to somebody and they sued you, what would they get? Answer: little or nothing.
Yeah, that was the point I made to Charles, is that more than half of America is judgment-proof, essentially. They don't have enough assets for you to get anything if you sue them.
His libertarian philosophy would insist that the government mandating that everybody carry insurance would be anathema to all libertarians. So his position simply doesn't hold water, because the way to make it work is by bigger government.
Yeah. Libertarianism has never been successfully tried anywhere in the world. And every time the libertarians have gotten into power and have tried to make it work, the Chicago School boys, the Milton Friedman boys, they went down to Chile and they tried to do this with Pinochet. And they said, this is going to be our great experiment. And they privatized Social Security and they privatized all kinds of stuff. And what it did was it produced a revolt to the point where Pinochet murdered over 3,600 people just to put down the revolt. They did it when the Soviet Union fell apart. They went over to Russia and they said to Boris Yeltsin, here's how to do it. And the product of that was a lot of oligarchs. They did it in South Africa when South Africa became free. The libertarians showed up. AT&T, I believe it was. It's in my book on equal protection. There were a couple of companies that went over and paid to help them write their constitution. And they wrote into the South African constitution that corporations are people and money is free speech. All these libertarian concepts that have made their way, that our Supreme Court has made into law, essentially. And it has never successfully been tried anywhere. But to successfully try it, you could pretty much only do it if everybody in the society had essentially the same high level of privilege. So everybody had as much to lose as everybody else in one of these lawsuits. Because, once you've got, what's the old Bob Dylan line? When you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose. I mean, you got somebody who's judgment proof, and you think that the threat of a lawsuit is going to cause them to slow down when they're going through a school crossing area. You're crazy. I mean, they may do it out of compassion or concern, but when you're arguing that you shouldn't even have to put up signs saying that it's a school crossing area and that there's a penalty for speeding, then, yeah, I'm with you, George. So, yeah. George, thanks a lot for the call. Well said. Watkins in Haydensville, Virginia. Hey, Watkins, got a minute. What's up?
Thank you for taking my call. One clarification I'd like to make about the so-called middle-class tax cut. The final outcome on that, it cut income taxes for couples earning up to or having up to $700,000 in taxable income as opposed to gross income, which is income after deductions and so forth. And at the same time, the same bill increased the FICA tax on workers. So it was nowhere near being a middle-class tax cut, and I think that's been a gross misrepresentation over the years. The other thing I'd like to say is that there's no substitute for putting responsibility where it belongs, and that's on the people to get off their butts and vote, because they're not voting, and I know that for a fact because I've studied the results, and it is simply appalling that we've got the government we deserve because people aren't bothering to. They're allowing the misrepresentations to influence their opinions when, in fact, they need to be paying attention and reading and doing a lot more to learn what in the heck's going on.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day after this. And welcome back. Michael, watching Free Speech TV in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Hartman. Okay, anything goes Friday.
Yep.
I was going through a Google question on my phone the other day, and a picture of you came up, so I clicked on it. And interestingly, what came up was the classical compositions of Joseph Maurice Ravel, who I've loved for decades.
Huh.
And one of his compositions was Concerto for the Left Hand. It's about a friend of his who was a concert pianist who fought in World War I. He lost his right arm. So Ravel wrote a whole symphony for him, his friend, to be able to play with only his left hand.
Bolero was Ravel's, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, Bolero.
Yeah,
and
that was one of my favorite pieces of music when I was a kid.
Okay, so you do like Ravel. Okay, yeah, I was just wondering if Ravel is one of the artists that you listen to in your private time.
I don't have any of his music on my phone or anything, so no, it's been probably 40 years since I've even listened to Bolero. But I had the 78 when I was a little kid. I started a radio station in my parents' house with a little 100 microwatt transmitter, and my friends who lived within 5 houses of us could hear it. And I had a record player and a little amplifier and this little transmitter that I had put together. This is when I was like, I don't know, 8, 9 years old, and I played DJ. and I was using my dad's record collection, and my 2 favorites were Clair de Lune and Bolero. I just loved both of those.
Gotcha. Well, again, you always recommend to us. You recommended me to read Ishmael, which I did. Thank you.
Isn't that a brilliant book?
Yeah, it is. But I really recommend you listen to Concerto for the Left Hand from Joseph Maurice Ravel. It's awesome, man.
I'll check it out. Thank you, Michael. Let's see here. From Michael to Michael. This is a Michael in Prescott, Arizona. Hey, Michael. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, first-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank you.
I have it just occurred to me recently that the 2 biggest problems that the Republicans have with the ACA are there's areas where there's only one insurer, and there's areas where doctors aren't taking Medicare or Medicaid. And I think there's a kind of simple solution, at least in my view. The first one is in those areas where the insurers have decided not to offer services, or maybe there's only one insurer, simply allow those people to buy into Medicaid or Medicare.
Yep.
The insurers aren't interested in that market anyway, apparently.
Yep.
And if it would be a simple
It's a
process,
very simple solution that Congress could pass with, a 3-page piece of legislation.
yes, and it wouldn't even be that big of a problem to find the people. If they go in to apply for Medicaid and they're disapproved because of their income, then you could automatically just offer them the ability to purchase it. And you could even purchase it at a little bit more to cover some of the people that are uninsured, maybe some of the young people that have an accident or something.
Sure.
And the other thing is as far as the doctors that don't accept Medicaid or Medicare, I believe that's probably because they don't get reimbursed as much as they would be if they went to a private insurer.
Right.
So why not just allow them to chart Medicare to pay or Medicaid to pay the same amount of money that they would a private insurer?
Well,
and
they
I
tend to
think
be far and few between, and there are some doctors. I mean, when we moved to Washington, D.C., we had a really hard time finding a doctor, and we needed one right away. And so we ended up going with a doctor who doesn't take any insurance. It's a concierge medicine kind of thing, where you pay the doctor up front every year. And I have enough of an income I can do it, but most Americans don't. Michael, thank you for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with me, and my old friend Garland Gilchrist II is a candidate for city clerk in Detroit, Michigan. Gilchrist, Gilchrist 4 FOR, cityclerk.com is his website. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/Gilchrist for City Clerk. His website, Gilchrist, Gilchrist 4 clerk, CLERK. Garland, welcome.
Tom, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you and your listeners.
It's great having you with us. So tell us about your candidacy. Why are you running for political office in Detroit?
Tom, I'm running for city clerk specifically because all across the country, people saw how long it took to count votes in Michigan. And that's because the system was broken in Detroit. We couldn't count the votes on time. We had broken machines. We had long lines, and we had poll workers who were not prepared to succeed. Well, Tom, I'm a technologist by training. I got 2 engineering degrees, and I have worked across the country to help mobilize and train voters, to help mobilize and organize people to help voting and making it easy to use technology to fix broken systems. And my community challenged me to step up and run for office for city clerk specifically to fix those problems. It took my family an hour and a half to vote. I was there with my wife and my twin babies. And twins don't like being somewhere for an hour and a half, Tom. They need to have a good process too. So I'm stepping up to fix that system.
Good on you. I should disclose, by the way, that Garland, you and I both serve on the board of directors of vocal.org, VOQAL.org, which is a charitable organization that dispenses grants to progressive groups, and which is how I met you, and many years ago. And we've worked together for years, and I have so much respect for you and love your family. And so how can people? We're talking with Garland Gilchrist II. Garland, how can people support your candidacy? Not everybody who's watching this show or listening to this show is in Detroit. What can people do? And what advice would you have for people like you were before you decided to run for political office in Detroit, who are looking around saying, hey, there's a problem in my community? How do you go about becoming like you are doing?
So the way that people can support me is to go to my website. That's GILCHRIST 4 cityclerk.com. Folks from around the country, they can donate to support the campaign. We need a lot of money to be able to run a really strong grassroots campaign that reaches out to the absentee voters, who are the highest performing voters in Detroit. Helps pay for mail, helps pay for organizing, which is so important. And Tom, to your other question about what can people do, this time of resistance, this time at the federal level, but also in so many places around the country, we need people to step up and take action. And frankly, I am answering that challenge. My community said, you know what, Garland, you have a great skill set and a great background, and we need someone who can fix that system so that more people can vote in Detroit. Because when more people vote, we get better people in office, we get better policies that reflect our values. And so they wanted me to step up and take that challenge. And so my challenge back to everyone else is there is a role for all of us to play in this resistance. And we all need to step up to make sure that we have the elected officials, the policies and programs that we want. And that may take some of us stepping up and running for office. But even more importantly than an individual making that decision, it takes a community to support these new leaders. We need new leadership, we need new energy, we need new skills, we need new training, but we need a community to support us. And one way you can support that is by supporting me and my candidacy in Detroit for Detroit City Clerk. Because that Detroit election, that helped bring Michigan into Trump's category. And while Michigan wasn't the deciding factor, he would have had a harder time winning the presidency if he didn't win Michigan.
Yeah, did I understand this correctly? I read it in a piece, but just because you read something on the internet, that in Detroit there were 75,000 votes that had no vote for president recorded on them, presumably because of defective machines.
Yeah, there were a very high number of votes that had voted for everything except for president. But you also, on the flip side of that, had a number of voters who just didn't complete their ballots. We had a really long ballot in Detroit. It was long, it was confusing, it was 2 pages and double-sided. And we just need to make that simpler for voters. You know, our voters want to cast their ballots, but they need to do it in a system they can trust and they can understand and they know will work for them. And I'm running for this office to make that count.
Yeah. Garland, what's the status of the whole, Governor Rick Snyder there in Michigan basically seizing control of Detroit, saying to the city council and the mayor, even though you were elected, tough luck, I'm going to put my emergency manager, little dictator, in charge. What's the status of that situation?
So thankfully, in the city of Detroit, we are out from under the leadership of emergency management specifically, but we still have to answer to something called a financial review commission for big city spending decisions until the end of the year. We've had 3 straight years of balanced budgets in Detroit, and what that means is that financial review commission is going to more or less go away, and Detroit will be back to self-determination. But there are other municipalities in Michigan who are still struggling and fighting with that. The way for us to fix that is to make sure that as many voters in Michigan, and particularly in Detroit, come out to vote. We have a governor's race next year. We get a chance to elect a new governor who can do something about this emergency management madness, this stripping away of democracy. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that voters in Detroit have their votes counted and their voices heard. The people have been able to win statewide elections in Michigan for way too long without Detroit really being able to have a say. But if we have a great system, if we have great processes, that'll lead to more Detroiters voting. And so therefore the politicians will not be able to ignore the voices of Detroiters. And so my job as the next city clerk is to make that happen so that we can have more turnout and our voices can be counted.
That is great. We have just a minute left, Garland. When you and I met, you were living here in Washington, D.C. You moved your family back to Detroit. What's Detroit like now?
I'm so happy to be home, Tom. I'm the happiest person in the city still because I'm raising my children in Detroit. I made an affirmative decision to come home. So some people, choose to go everywhere in the world, but I wanted to come to the city that's most important to me, and that's Detroit. I learned how to serve here from my mother and my grandmother doing public service since I was a child. I knocked on my first door when I was 3. And now I'm following in that legacy by stepping up to run for Detroit City Clerk to help, again, Detroiters have their voices heard and their votes called. I'm tall, Tom. I'm 6'8", everybody, and I'm here to stand tall for Detroit voters. And so please support my campaign at GilchristForCityClerk.com.
There you go, GilchristForCityClerk.com. It's FOR, GilchristForCityClerk.com. And on Facebook, Facebook.com/GilchristForCityClerk. You can tweet Garland at Gilchrist4Clerk, CLERK. So, Garland, best of luck on your efforts there. And anything we can do to help, let us know, okay?
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you to your listeners, everyone. Let's go win.
There you go. Garland Gilchrist II. Thank you, Garland. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome back to Thom Hartmann University, the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perception. I think it's the only book that I've written that Time Magazine has done a story on. This is, we're in chapter 14. Throughout the book, I explain the whole idea of hunters and farmers, that ADD characteristics are something that would help in a hunting-gathering society. They become a liability in an agricultural society. And so this chapter is titled The Edison Trait, Hunters Who Have Changed the World. Hunters sometimes have difficulty answering the question, what do you do for a living? It's not that there isn't an answer, there are too many answers. Hunters of above average or even genius intelligence often have resumes that are startling in their diversity and accomplishment, even though they may have struggled to simply finish high school. Similarly, the stereotype of the eccentric genius or loony creative type is often applied to hunter inventors, artists, writers, and designers. At many ad agencies, the creative types are allowed or even encouraged to have an eccentric appearance with flowered shirts, long hair, jeans, etc. As the chapter on ADD and creativity pointed out, the ability to think innovatively is intrinsically tied to the ability to fall into an open and therefore distractible state of consciousness, one of the characteristics of ADHD. Conversely, to make use of the inspirations gained from such typical hunter-free association, there must be a compensating burst of focused energy in order to bring these concepts into reality. Learning to channel these bursts is the challenge to every hunter. When hunters fail in life, it is often because their self-image was distorted in an early age when they were labeled as a problem. Their assets are also neglected if they plug into a job or a segment of society which requires farmer rather than hunter skills. But let's look at some successful hunters in history who have demonstrated tremendous powers of transformation, vitality, and dynamic energy, and whose biographies appear to conform to the American Psychiatric Association's DSM criteria of ADHD. While it's impossible for us to reach back to historic figures and ask them to answer the questions which might lead to a medically supportable diagnosis of ADHD, their life stories very often give us those answers in a rather overt fashion. Consider the following. The life of Thomas Alva Edison has been an inspiration to hunter boys for nearly a century. Born in the Midwest before the Civil War, Edison wrote, quote, I remember I used never to be able to get along at school. I was always at the foot of the class. I used to feel that the teachers did not sympathize with me and that my father thought I was stupid. Edison complained about the distractions of the other children in his school and the fact that learning was abstract and not real. To be able to actually do something, to test a theory or discover a fact through experience, he wrote in his diary, quote, for one instant was better than learning about something he had never seen for 2 hours, end quote. Believing her son had potential, Edison's mother took over his schooling. Instead of requiring her son to learn a particular curriculum by rote, she instead encouraged him to explore things he found interesting. He soon became a voracious reader and consumed a huge body of knowledge at a wide variety of subjects. Edison left home at the age of 12 and started a long procession of short-lived jobs. The year he was 17, he held 4 different jobs, being fired from each one because of his inattentiveness to the duties or routine of the job. When he was 15, he had a job as a railroad signalman during the night and had to clock in via telegraph every hour. He was fired when his superiors learned that his punctual check-in signal was actually transmitted by a simple invention he'd created from an alarm clock which would send the Morse code signal on the hour. That invention led to his developing the first automatic telegraph and then the first stock ticker, although he held a dozen more jobs before he received $40,000 for his stock ticker at age 21 and was able to use that money to establish a laboratory where he could devote himself to inventing. Being a classic hunter, Edison usually worked on many projects at the same time. In the year of 1877, for example, we now know that he had more than 40 inventions in process in his laboratory concurrently. He kept his own hours, often working through the night. When he became bored or saturated with one invention, he would quickly hop to another. Edison credited his inability to stick to one task for a long time as being the power of his creative efforts. He wrote, quote, he said, quote, look, I start here with the intention of going there, drawing an imaginary line, in an experiment, say, to increase the speed of the Atlantic cable. But when I've arrived part of the way in my straight line, I meet with a phenomena, and it leads me off in another direction to something totally unexpected, end of quote. Thomas Edison transformed the 20th century with his invention of the electric light bulb, the central power generating station, the phonograph, the flexible celluloid film and movie projector, the alkaline storage battery, and the microphone, merely a few of the more than 1,000 major patents he registered before his death in 1931. Benjamin Franklin flunked out of George Brownell's academy after only 2 years of formal education. It was said that he was slow at doing sums, math, and he utterly failed in arithmetic. His teacher complained that he would never pay attention to his lessons. He spent 2 years as an apprentice candlemaker to his father, but his father's frustrations with young Ben were legion. The boy was always slipping off to explore the town, the salt marshes, and the incoming ships. Having demonstrated his hunter inability to be a scholar in the formal farmer schools of the day, Franklin went on to become one of the most well-educated in terms of practical abilities men in American history. Although he couldn't stick with a single job, Franklin is now celebrated for his accomplishments in dozens of roles. He was a printer, moralist, civic leader, essayist, inventor, scientist, diplomat, publisher, statesman, postmaster, candlemaker, mechanic, and philosopher, among others. His impulsive streak, which was partially responsible for the creation of the United States of America, showed itself early when, at the age of 16, he wrote several articles for the Courant, a Boston newspaper making fun of Boston's authorities and society figures. Anyhow, the book is Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perception.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is David Wood. And David is the senior military correspondent with the Huffington Post, HuffingtonPost.com. I read this article over at HuffPo, and it just, reminded me of something that I was aware of, but not. It's sort of like, we know this stuff, but we don't know it. It's not at the top of our minds, and it really should be. You can tweet David Wood, by the way, at WoodWriter. And the title of the article was Forget North Korea, the next nuclear crisis festers on the India-Pakistan border. David, welcome to the program.
Hi, Todd. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So you want to give us this a snapshot of your article, of the analysis that you put forward?
Sure. So India and Pakistan, two longtime bitter enemies, since they both separated from the British Empire in 1947. They fought four wars and a whole bunch of border skirmishes, and there's been terrorism back and forth. So it's a very unstable part of the world. They both have pretty sizable nuclear arsenals. In fact, they are like major nuclear weapons powers. And so it's an inherently unstable situation, made worse because of terrorism and the risk that terrorists could accidentally or on purpose start a nuclear war.
Wow. So how does that risk compare to the risk of, North Korea tripping something off, or China getting into a conflict with the United States over the Spratly Islands, something that John Pilger just made a movie about, predicting, in fact, the title of the movie is The Coming War with China, or any of the other potential nuclear conflicts around the world, the possibility of, well, I was going to say Iran-Israel, but Iran's nuclear program has been stopped. But in any case, how does this compare with other threats around the world?
Well, let's take the U.S. and Russia first, because that's really the oldest one. And there we have at least some existing crisis management knowledge and mechanisms. Not a lot, not as much as we had during the Cold War, but some. U.S. and China, again, you have leaders who are aware of the risk of nuclear war and
a lot of money at stake.
That too. The problem with India and Pakistan is that it's an unstable part of the country, and we don't know much about their crisis management mechanisms and intentions. They're both deeply suspicious of the other with some reason, and that makes it a pretty unstable part of the world. I looked up to find out what would happen if they did have a nuclear war, and it would be catastrophic for the entire globe. Because if it got to the point where they were putting nuclear weapons into each other's cities, the amount of smoke and soot and debris in the atmosphere would have a cataclysmic effect on world temperatures and agriculture. But then you have North Korea, and the risk there is totally unknown. That's the problem. I don't personally see any evidence that Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, is intent on going to war with the United States, which clearly would be catastrophic for him. But we don't know, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, and if you go back and look at the history of the Korean conflict, the Korean War, I mean, we should call it. It was never a declared war, which was part of the problem. We were brutal. I mean, we dropped more bombs on Korea than we did on Germany. It was North Korea. It was just, we just flattened that country, and they do not forget that. They remember it well. But you know, we'll see where this goes. With regard to India and Pakistan, is there? You said that that we don't know what kind of systems might be in place to de-escalate, to rapidly de-escalate in the event of what could potentially be a nuclear confrontation or even an accidental nuclear confrontation. Are there any efforts being made either by the United Nations or the U.S. State Department or other agencies within the United States government or other international bodies, NATO, for example, to try to mediate the conflict between India and Pakistan? I mean, the thing that concerns me the most is the rise of a Wahhabist variation of Sunni Islam in Pakistan that has apparently well infiltrated their military to the point that they were hiding Osama bin Laden on the one hand. And on the other hand, the rise of an extreme nationalist, Modi, in India as the president of India, a guy who provoked riots back when he was a provincial mayor, as I recall, or governor. Yeah, you can correct me on this. I'm sure you know and I don't. That led to the death of many, I think it was over 1,000 Muslims. You know, he's explicitly a Hindu nationalist, and in Pakistan you've got this very explicit hard right militaristic nationalistic variation on Islam. Is my analysis screwed up, or am I describing the situation with some accuracy? And B, is there anybody doing anything about this?
Well, no, I don't think your analysis is screwed up. It's that bad and worse. But let's unpack this a little bit. Back during the Clinton administration and in some years following, there was some U.S. effort to help Pakistan with technical expertise to secure its nuclear weapons. So there are things called permissive action links, which are basically the lot nuclear weapons. You know, famously, we know from the movies that missile submarines, for example, require 2 keys, one from the commander and one from one of his senior people, in order to make the missile live and usable.
Right.
So there are those kinds of things. I don't think, from all of that I can find out, the Pakistanis basically said thanks, but no thanks, because we don't want you making our permissive active action links, and we don't want you to particularly know how we secure our nuclear weapons. We got that. Thank you. So we don't really know how well their weapons are secured. So that's one set of problems. But the more worrying thing is, as you point out, the underlying religious and social and political tensions between these two powers, I don't personally see much U.S. diplomacy of the kind of thing we need, a very low-key, behind-the-scenes, locally driven American diplomacy to help de-escalate the tensions that already occur. Just last week, I think there was a border incident in which an Indian officer was killed. That kind of thing happens all the time, and those are really dangerous because of the possibility of miscalculation or deliberate escalation, and that then gets out of control, and off we go.
Do the conflicts in the Kashmir region play into this, or is that a whole separate thing?
You know, again, it's hard to tell. So here you have the two armies poised in that part of the world, which is very high altitude, very snowy, cold. You know, they fire artillery shells at each other every couple of weeks and sometimes do some minor damage. And there's a lot of local animosity between the two sides. That's the kind of thing that could set off a larger conflict. But that's true almost everywhere you look along the border between these two countries.
Right. Okay. David Wood, senior military correspondent with the Huffington Post, HuffingtonPost.com. If you want to look up his article, it's titled "Forget North Korea, the Next Nuclear Crisis Festers on the India-Pakistan Border." You can tweet him at Woodwriter, W-R-I-T-E-R, Woodwriter, or at Huffington Post. David, thanks for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you for writing this piece. This is important stuff. I really appreciate it. We'll be right back with Anything Goes Friday. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls and more of the news of the day. And boy, do I have some news right after this. And welcome back. Robert in Greenville, North Carolina. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV, by the way.
You're welcome, Tom. A couple of days ago, you were discussing that you had friends that voted for Donald Trump just to shake up Washington.
Yeah.
I disagree with anyone. I had friends that voted for Donald Trump. I had family members that voted for Donald Trump. I no longer have anything to do with them.
Yeah.
I avoid any.
Well, these are not so much friends as they are neighbors. They're people who live in the same community I live in and who I've gotten to know. So, you know, I consider them casual friends. This is not my close friend, my close circle of friends. I would have a hard time having a long-term friendship relationship with anybody who was quite that bizarre politically. But the people that I live with and that I know are decent people. In most other regards. I know a number of them. Anyway, back to you, Robert. I'm sorry.
I even canceled the Daily Reflector, the newspaper we get here in Greenville, wrote a letter to the editor, and because they endorsed Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I do business with some Republicans out of necessity, but if I know I have an opportunity to do business with someone that's not a Republican, business-wise or any way or form, I avoid any kind of individual. I feel like you have to be morally bankrupt to vote for Donald Trump under any circumstances. It's just, I just can't see any human being that's a decent person voting for Trump. And what's really frightening, in North Carolina, in 4 years, when Purdue lost the governorship to McCrory, what they've done in North Carolina in 4 years, it took 50 years to get where we are now. I mean, where we were before they got in. In 4 years, what they've done in this state is unbelievable.
Oh, the Republicans are committed to taking us, at the very least, back before 1964, back before the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. I mean, look what the Supreme Court did, right? And, among other things. And arguably, I think that they're committed to taking us back before the New Deal, taking us back to 1928. They want to go back to Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover politics, economics, and social policies.
And unfortunately, the Democrats, there's a lot of Democrats that aren't who we wish they would be, that are in Washington. that are just looking at the next election.
Yeah.
For their own sake, not for the sake of the country, because the Democrats had a lot to do with where we are now. There's only a handful of people in politics, and Bernie Sanders is, he's the man.
Yeah. No, absolutely. What I found fascinating, and the point that I was trying to make wasn't so much that I knew people who voted for Trump, but that about half of these people or a good fraction of them, I haven't done a sit-down survey, and I'm probably talking about maybe 10 or 12 people here, who, live on boats near mine. And, we sit in the clubhouse around and have beers together from time to time, that at least half of these people were supporting Bernie Sanders before they went to Donald Trump. And it was that they felt that the political system of both parties was broken. And they wanted somebody from the outside who was going to come in and shake things up. And I think that it's a very simplistic sentiment, but for somebody who doesn't get a lot of news and, just thinks in these very polar terms, there's a certain logic to it. Robert, thank you for the call.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day,
every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us,
raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I am super pleased to have in the studio with me Jan Frell, who is what's your official title over at Alternate?
The editor at large.
Big Cheese? Editor at large.
Associate publisher.
Okay. Editor at large and associate publisher, Alternate. And let me just tell people, you guys just put up. Yesterday afternoon, I was sitting over at the TV studio watching. I'd been watching this Rose Garden thing where they just were doing the whole big lie thing. Yeah, we're going to cut your rates and we're going to get pre-existing cut, lie after lie after lie. And I thought somebody has to point out that this is the big lie. This is Goebbels' strategy. I wrote the piece, sent it off to you. It just went up on Alternate. Thank you so much for that.
Now.
Yeah, and so alternate.org if you want to read my most recent op-ed, which is, by the way, what I started out the show with, just doing that rant.
Right.
But so how's everything at Alternate, and what are the stories right now that you personally think people who are listening to this program need to know about?
So I guess there's two bigger stories that I am, to a larger extent, the editorial team are tracking. One is trying to come to grips with what it is we're really seeing with the Trump administration. Is it sort of like the end of the Enlightenment, the end of our politics as we know it? That's kind of one question. Or are we just looking at a kind of a media goon who's now the tip of the spear of the longtime Republican agenda, with a dash of incompetence, and then also kind of a person who sharpened their teeth as a huckster in real estate and media?
Yeah.
It looks like kind of like the latter. It looks like the world's going to keep going like we know it, with a little bit of incompetence, but really aggressive theft techniques, some of which are new to politics as we know it. Some of they're kind of familiar.
I saw an interview, and I think I might have seen it, or an article. I think I might have seen it on Alternate. This was maybe 6 months or longer ago. But somebody had found an old interview with Donald Trump, like from the 80s, where they said, what's your favorite book? And he said, The Art of Money Making by P.T. Barnum.
Yeah.
And so I just, I went online and I just bought myself a copy.
Oh, cool.
And it should arrive today or tomorrow. And it's a short book. It's like 80 pages, so Donald Trump could actually read it.
Right.
but I have a feeling that he has literally modeled his life on P.T. Barnum.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like okay, so that actually tracks with what we see as a guy who kind of he even says it sometimes in interviews. He said, I can be a lot more presidential. I'll get less done, and by getting done, basically just theft for rich people.
Right.
But I'll get a lot less done because I've basically honed this technique of sort of I can be everything. I can sort of seem crazy and take you on a spin, and you'll get distracted, and then I'll get a little more leverage when it comes to deal-making time.
Well, he tells the story in The Art of the Deal about how he was trying to get the banks to finance a development project that he wanted to do, and they were concerned that the property next door to them, if I'm remembering this right, it's just some variation on this, and correct me if you know what I'm talking about, I got it wrong. The property next door to them was like a vacant lot. And so he hired a bunch of bulldozers and dump trucks to come in. And on the day that the bankers, the investors, were showing up to see where he was going to be building, he had them moving land, move piles of dirt from here to there and then move it back from there to here. So it looks like there's all kinds of activity going on. And they showed up and they were like, wow, there's a lot going on here. We need to get in on this.
Yeah, exactly.
And, and he brags about that. I mean, so it's like reality doesn't matter. It's all perception.
And then then there's some kind of deal. I mean, if you live in this country or if you travel around, buildings do get built with his name on it. God knows what the paperwork looks like on the back end.
Yeah.
But somehow this kind of works. And it might very well be, that when he was doing the healthcare debate, he was saying, no, let's just try my crazy way and see if we can actually destroy Obamacare. I know you guys don't think you can, but maybe actually we can destroy Obamacare by going with my crazy tactics where it looks like it's kind of failing, it's boom bust, but then at the end of the day we'll have the House thing, and then the Paul Ryan and company says, well, even if we do that, it's not going to pass the Senate. But maybe we have to give this guy a second and see if they can actually steal something from our healthcare system through the Senate with his new tactics, which are currently sort of unfamiliar to the Republican theft model and the Democrats' way of losing.
Yeah, he's so obsessed with being the guy who's the hero. Yeah. I'm waiting for him to learn about Tommy Douglas, because if he were to ever learn that there was this small town politician or small province politician in Canada, is their grandfather, Kiefer Sutherland, who in Saskatchewan invented single-payer health care for Saskatchewan and is now today the most beloved political figure in the history of Canada.
Right.
That I have a feeling that Donald Trump would say, screw these Republicans, I'm going to reach out to the Democrats, and we're going to do single-payer here. It's actually the conservative thing to do. It'll save us $600 billion a year in overhead costs.
That's possible with him. You can see a streak in him where he does just want to be liked.
Yeah, or loved, actually.
Or loved, yeah. He wants.
It's the real word. I think he was, his parents rejected him, sent him off to military school. He was the.
And Paul Ryan actually was warning about that. There was a moment about a month ago where he was saying to the House caucus, he was saying, look, if we don't do a deal with him, I kind of feel like this guy will just go try the other side and try to do a deal with them.
And he will. And Charles Krauthammer yesterday said we are now 7 years away from single payer. Charles Krauthammer on Fox News. I mean, this is like, so
it's funny how the wind is blowing. Yeah, how this goes. I mean,
on the other hand, he could flip into total Hitler mode.
Right. Yeah. The other piece of it, which is something Chomsky talks about, is that it's not just 70 or 80% of the public that wants single payer. You have a lot of organized business in this country that sees
absolutely
huge efficiencies coming their way.
GM was pushing for it back years ago.
So and that's that's always going on in a different conversation level.
Have to wrap it up. Jan Frell, the editor.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Jan Frell, editor-at-large of Alternet.org, and my new piece is up at the very top today. Go check it out. Thanks, Jan.
You're welcome, Tom.
Great to see you. We'll be back. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Death in the Pines, a novel set in Vermont. You have to be crazy to do this. On a morning when the Vermont winter sun shone pale and weak across 6 crisp inches of fresh snow, when the temperature hovered somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees Fahrenheit, I spent a long time searching for 10 stones.
They had to be the right stones, of a certain weight and shape, heavy but not so heavy they exhausted me, rounded but not so much that they would roll from the place I set them. It took 5 hours to find all 10 of them, searching in the sheltered places where the dry, powdery snow was easier to scrape aside. But then they had to be lugged to the spot I had selected, mindless beast of burden work that made me sweat inside my downline jacket. I stacked the stones carefully into a hollow, truncated pyramid. Anyone coming across that pile of stones in 10 or 100 years would know they weren't dropped there haphazardly by a retreating glacier. This was a made thing, too small to be a cairn, too insignificant to be the remnants of a wall. I guess you could call it an altar. The ashes were in a bronze urn, far too small to contain the spirit of my friend John Lincoln. The container had stood on the shelf in my cabin for too many months. The new year had just arrived, and with it a belated first snowfall of the season, and the combination of the two had finally persuaded me it was time to do something about the urn. Holding it in the chill, near silence of the forest, I stood over the structure I'd made and looked off into the distance, seeing but not seeing the brownish shafts of pines streaked with snow, the bare gray trunks of maples, the white and gray columns of birch, the deep shaded greens of white burdened firs. At that moment, the urn felt heavier than the stones themselves. This was why I was here. The mind drifts at such times. Even after 6 years, I could recall the particular night that had caused me to travel to this place. On that night, my mentor, no, by that time my friend, John and I had been slumped in the rotting front seat of an ancient rusting 55 Ford parked in the heavy, humid midnight of Central America. Despite the choking reek of insect repellent, voracious mosquitoes whined in through the open windows, and from time to time we slapped an offender, reducing it to a crumble of tissue to be flicked off with a fingertip. Still warmer than blood heat even at that hour. The dark air sizzled with cicadas. We had left our home base in Atlanta a week before and had taken a circuitous route to this dark clearing hacked from the jungle. We were waiting for either 3 or 4 men to emerge from a blacked-out warehouse, and we had no idea whether those men knew we were watching or how well they might be armed. What we would do depended on how many came out. If only 3, we'd move in and recover what had been stolen. 4 would make the recovery problematic, because that would mean that at least one of the men would be a local, complicating the calculus of violence. As I stood over the stone altar, every detail of our conversation went through my mind. A tape rewound and replayed. By that point in our lives, John and I had been partners for so long that we didn't BS each other, had no need to strain for machismo, no use for phony heartiness. We were a good team. We could finish each other's sentences, catch body language signals that amounted to a silent code, recognize unspoken concerns and anxieties in time to be prepared for the unexpected. We told all our jokes to each other years before. Once in a while, one of us might mutter 2 or 3 words of a punchline. The other would chuckle in appreciation or exasperation as the mood took him. That night, in stop and start fashion, we had each spoke of good times we'd had. Waiting in the dark gave each of us a natural urge to talk. That was the one and only time that John had spoken of his quiet way in the forested hills of Vermont, thinking of the coolness of a New England autumn in that hellish tropic night. I'd never known that he'd been to Vermont. He had lived in Buckhead, a suburb of Atlanta, the whole time I'd known and worked with him. But in those suffocating hours of darkness, cool green Vermont was on his mind. Beautiful place, very peaceful, he said. I'd like to go back there when it's all over. I didn't have time to ask what he meant or what would be over. The job, the summer, the career, the life. At that moment, dim yellow light from a kerosene lantern appeared on the black face of the warehouse. First a line, then a thin rectangle, then a fat square as the 3 men inside pushed open the double doors. John and I climbed out of our borrowed car and did our job. In the 6 years that followed that night, John never had gone back to Vermont, had never spoken of it again. And now for him, it really was all over. After the memorial service, after the will was probated, I didn't feel like hanging around Atlanta. So I made arrangements, gave most of my liquid assets to a community for abused kids in New Hampshire, and bought a cabin on 200 acres in the woods of Vermont. It was here I'd brought my old friend to the place he'd talked about. Pondering the finality of it all, I held the urn containing his ashes, a few bone fragments and pieces of his teeth, ready to fulfill a promise I had never made. Such a time demands words. I took a deep breath of icy air and looked up toward the top of a towering birch. A squirrel made an untidy, tangled nest up there in the highest branches, and the animal itself, or maybe another squirrel, who could tell, hung below the nest, head down in the trunk, apparently gazing at me. I imagined the squirrel's bright black eye held accusation. The fall had gone on so long, probably for half the animal's lifetime. So what was the idea of all this snow? Was I to blame? Clearing my throat, I reached far back into memory, groping for the prayers I had last recited as a child. I heard myself say, "Dear God." My words took flight toward the washed-out sky on puffs of vapor. As far as I could tell, no one heard them but me and the squirrel. My voice had a harsh tone even to my own ears, a rusty hinge catch. The book is Death in the Pines. It's an Oakley Tyler novel based in Vermont.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Nate, can you tell me what website this is from so I can credit it properly? TheRoot.com. Okay, TheRoot.com. Kirsten West Savali wrote this piece. Nate found it for me and shared it with me. Something really stinky is going on in Ferguson, Missouri. Just to back up a little bit, back in November 2014, after the jury refused to indict Darren Wilson, the cop who murdered Mr. Brown, Mike Brown, Deandra Joshua was one of the people who was one of the more prominent protesters. Deandra was 20 years old, was found shot once in the head inside a burning car. Bloodied glass was discovered on the ground beside his white Pontiac Grand Prix right next to the Canfield Green Apartments where Mike Brown was killed. So that happened in November 2014. And then there's this guy named Darren Seals that the Root had also reported about. He's 29 years old, another Ferguson, Missouri protester and activist who rose to prominence in the wake of Mike Brown's death. He was found dead last September, just 5-6 months ago. He had been shot in the head and was placed in a car, which was then set on fire. And now we've got another. Edward Crawford, 27, a Ferguson, Missouri protester and activist. I'm reading from Kirsten West Savali's piece in The Root. Was found in his car dead from a gunshot wound. Reports are not clear on whether the shooting took place Thursday night or early Friday morning. We're talking right now, yesterday. Police investigators are calling it self-inflicted. According to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Crawford was in a car when the gun went off. 2 women were in the car with him, police say. The women told police Crawford had started talking about how depressed he was. They heard him fumbling around for something. The next thing they knew, he shot himself. The police event of versions has not been independently confirmed. Crawford instantly became an icon of the movement for Black Lives when a photo emerged of him throwing a tear gas canister back toward police officers during the 2014 protests following the extrajudicial killing of Michael Brown Jr. by police officer Darren Wilson. Those on the side of justice and against the hypermilitarization of police applauded the act of resistance. In 2014, in an interview with CNN, Crawford said his instinct was to get the weapon away from the children. His father, Edward Crawford Sr., 52, confirmed his son's death and said, "I don't believe it was a suicide. They're being hush-hush. He was wonderful, great, always in a good mood. He just got a new apartment and was training for a new job, and he is the father of 4 children." So this is the third anti-Ferguson police activist, for lack of a better way to describe it. I mean, at least from the point of view of the Ferguson Police Department, to have been shot in the head in his car in a year and a half. What the hell is going on in Ferguson, Missouri? Inquiring minds want to know. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you for taking my call again here. I'll take that.
Sure, no problem. What's up? What's up, Marty?
Just wanted to share an idea for a website with either you or your listeners, because I certainly don't have the time to throw one together. But I noticed that the domain laughatjeffsessions.com is still available. So I thought that would be a fun.
Well, Marty, you could probably pick it up for $20, over at GoDaddy or Dotster, or there's a half a dozen of those sites. I'm maxed out bandwidth-wise in terms of projects, but that's a great one. Laughatjeffsessions.com. And of course, I'm guessing what you're referring to is the Code Pink woman who
who just, erupted in just one laugh. when which Republican senator was it was saying, we know that you're such a champion of civil rights and, a long history and all this kind of stuff. And she was staying way at the back of the room, and she just, you're kidding. She didn't even say you're kidding. She just laughed. And she was just a couple of days ago, on the same day that Jeff Sessions announced that he was not going to prosecute the 2 white police officers who murdered Alton Sterling, his Justice Department convicted her, and she's looking at a year in prison for laughing at Jeff Sessions, at the Attorney General. So, I mean, this is, and I think juxtaposing those 2 events happening on the same day is a really good idea. Marty, thanks for the heads up on that. That's fascinating. Mike in Los Angeles. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Just wanted to call out everybody in California or anyone who knows somebody in California, passing on our revolution call to action. Because as you remember, single payer in Canada started with 1 province, and now California is getting in a position where we might get it here. And the bill is Senate Bill 562. So if everyone would call their California state senator and ask them to vote for single-payer health care, maybe we could get it.
Yeah, and you need to call your assemblymen, too, don't you? Men and women?
The call right now is for the state.
But it's in the Senate right now. And then does it go from the Senate to the Assembly?
Presumably so. The website for the legislature is calegislature.gov.
Okay.
So everybody can find who their state senator is that way.
Yeah, I think there's a very good chance California could be like Saskatchewan. I mean, they tried it in Vermont, but with only a 600,000 person population and a lot of poverty in Vermont, they just did not have the mass, the physical and financial mass to do single payer. And
California is the 6th largest economy in the world.
Right.
So.
California could do it in a heartbeat. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Good luck with that, Mike. And thank you for the call, and thanks for the heads up on and all the detail. John in Carrollton, Texas. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Let me state my affiliation. It's a complicated relationship I have with you. I respect you. I'm amazed at your ability, and I only agree with you 15% of the time. It's
okay.
terrible for me. But I do think this healthcare reform stuff is completely wrong-headed, because it's one thing when you say, hey, we're going to give pre-existing condition coverage to everybody. It's not going to work. It's like telling somebody, hey, I'm going to give everybody car insurance, but you don't have to get the insurance until after you have your wreck. It's so expensive. There's a book, and you would love it, called How Do Doctors Die? If you go read that book, it's interesting because the cost in the system is so extraordinarily weighted to the end of life.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the book.
Beginning. It's a great book. And so what ends up happening is mom is sick, and we want to take care of mom, but we're going to be injudicious about how we spend our money about making mom survive 6 months or a year. And everybody would look at the cost and go, well, that's crazy, right up into the point when it's your mom.
Right.
And so Medicare, Medicaid, all of those types of programs, there is no transparency in the cost. And we get mad when we say, I can't believe the insurance company doesn't want to cover this, or like Jimmy Kimmel ran the other night. Yeah. Everybody feels compassion for him. The problem is, why is the doctor allowed to charge whatever they want and somebody else needs to pay for it? We got to fix that. Transparency is where the solution is.
Well, with that, this is the advantage of a single-payer system, John, and this is why I'm convinced that if my dad, the William Buckley conservative Republican, was alive today, he would be supporting single-payer. And a lot of Republicans I know support single-payer because it's the conservative response. We are the only developed country in the world that legally allows for-profit bankers to insert themselves between us and our physicians or our hospitals. We are the only country that allows that. And those banksters are skimming 20, 25, 30% off the top to make themselves rich. You got Stephen J. Hemsley, the CEO of United Healthcare, who has taken over $1 billion in compensation from that company. Over $1 billion. Your average healthcare CEO, the bankster healthcare CEO, is running $15 to $20 million a year. And when you add stock options on that, some of them are making over $100 million a year. These guys are leeches. They're parasites you've got a hospital in New York City where an entire floor is devoted to billing. You've got an identical size hospital in Toronto where one desk with 2 people at it does all the billing for the hospital because it's a single payer system. We would save $608 billion a year if we went to single payer. And $145 billion of that is just the administrative costs that occur in hospitals and doctors' offices having to deal with multiple insurance companies. And then once you've got single payer, you've got everybody in the program. So any discussions about, how do we calibrate this program? To what extent are we going to throw heroic efforts at end-of-life decisions? To what extent are we going, et cetera, et cetera? First of all, pre-existing conditions just vanishes as an issue, because everybody is covered from cradle to grave. And secondly, those larger issues about, what are we going to do about people who smoke? How are we going to encourage them not to smoke? They become matters of public policy, and everybody has a say in it. Everybody has skin in the game, as, conservatives like to use the phrase. What do you think, John?
Well, I think you're well read, and I think you have a lot of ideas. I do think that it is probably inaccurate when you talk about the number of people involved in billing and those types of issues, because I guarantee you
it's not.
Run into more
Albert Einstein Hospital in New York City versus I can't remember the name of the hospital in Toronto. I'm sorry, but the comparison, it was in the New York Times. It's
okay, but let's go back to your point about Helmsley and United Healthcare or United Health Group. So if you pulled every single stitch of profit out of insurance, it's 3 to 4%. It's not like it's going to make the cost go down.
No, but you've got all this administration, you've got all this overhead, you've got the corporate jets, you've got all the marketing expenses. You've got United Healthcare has over 100 executives who make more than $1 million a year. So, I think there's no, in fact, under the ACA, the most that the health insurance companies can skim off the top is now 20%. Medicare's overhead is 3%. That's where we need to go, John.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Clifton in Roscoe, Illinois. Hey, Clifton, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Yes, Tom. I have a statement, and then I'd like your opinion. Most times when I'm watching news or whatever, and Democrats, whether they be senators or congressmen, are questioned about the Affordable Care Act insofar as it's not performing very well, could you explain to me, or what's your explanation as to why these people, the Democrats, don't ever refer to Rubio and what he did to really ding the system by pulling funds?
Yeah.
Could you please explain that, if you would, to me?
I think it's a failure of messaging within the Democratic Party. There is, to the best of my knowledge, no infrastructure in the Democratic Party to say, here is our message of the day, or here is our message of the week, or here's how we are phrasing our message. That infrastructure very much and very solidly exists within the Republican Party. And it is linked at the hip with a massive Republican media infrastructure of literally thousands of radio stations around the country. There are probably 3 or 4 dozen radio stations that carry progressive programming, but there are thousands that carry right-wing programming, and the word does come down every day, and Fox News, and with MSNBC, you've got Andy Lack now trying to turn MSNBC into a right-wing network, and he's, in fact, there was a piece in I have to track it down. In fact, I think I've got it right up on my. No, I don't. I must have covered it up with something else. Anyhow, there was an article just a couple of days ago about how he is, he was planning on Hillary Clinton winning and then getting rid of the progressives at MSNBC and replacing them with the middle of the road, Brian Williams types and all this kind of stuff. And so there's this huge infrastructure for the right. There is no parallel infrastructure on the left. The closest we have to it is Free Speech TV. and programs like mine and Stephanie's and the Young Turks and Amy Goodman, and which is just a shadow of what exists on the right, because we don't have an entire network. I mean, when the Koch brothers pull together their billionaires, they get 300-400 people, all of them, worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and all of them kicking in literally hundreds of millions of dollars, in aggregate, hundreds of millions to billions of dollars a year for the political process. On the Democratic side, I've been to DA meetings, the Democratic Alliance meetings, where the rich Democrats get together. And, it's like, well, let's fund something for 2 or 3 years and see if they can get on their feet. And, oh, yeah, I'll put in $20,000. It's like, Air America, went out of business because of a $17 million loss. Fox News lost $100 million for 5 years before they made a profit. And, the right, they've got these really deep pockets. And on the left, you're not going to find that many billionaires who are going to say, yeah, I'm going to invest in a political infrastructure that's going to raise my taxes. I mean, I think that's very noble of George Soros to do that, although he's not that big a donor either. It's just, it's there, but there are some, and God bless them. But it ain't happening, across the board. And now all these Silicon Valley billionaires, they call themselves libertarians, and they're aligning themselves with the Republican Party. So I think that's a large part of it, is this failure of messaging in the Democratic Party, combined with a failure of an infrastructure, a Drudge Report to Fox News that kicks it into the mainstream corporate media that just doesn't exist on the left. Clifton, thanks for the call. We'll be right back with Patrick Gavin. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News, find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do, The Elements of a Great Working Life. On the line with us, Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Hey, Patrick.
Hey, how are you?
Good. So what's going on in the world today?
Well, we're all still unpacking what took place yesterday with healthcare, which I know you've been talking about. I thought we could kind of take a look at what some of what the look ahead looks like. I mean, on the one hand, I think that at least people here in Washington think this is, politically speaking, a big win for Trump, although somebody had a good point this morning, which is, that scene in the Rose Garden yesterday, which is really kind of bizarre. I mean, you don't typically have Rose Garden ceremonies when you haven't actually passed a law. But if this doesn't go the way that Republicans want it to, which is still an uncertainty at best, I mean, someone had a good point that kind of picture of them all in the Rose Garden could have sort of like a mission accomplished type feel if this ends up being, A, not only a failure in the Senate, which looks, certainly in its current form, it's dead on arrival, but two, if in fact, even if this passes the Senate looking somewhat close to what the House did, there's a lot of speculation and thought that this could end up being political suicide for a lot of Republicans. I mean, even the Cook political report, I know you know what that is for your listeners who might not. It's sort of this weather vane of who's up, who's down in House and Senate races. They today are shifting their 2018 forecast for the House. 20 House districts, all of them are moving in favor of Democrats.
These are the House districts that Republican won the House, but Hillary Clinton won the top of the ticket.
Exactly. Yep. I think getting back to the House is still a reach for Democrats, but it's looking closer and closer every day with this stuff.
Yeah, there was an interesting piece in Politico, Patrick, today about that. That basically said that the only reason this thing happened was because Donald Trump was throwing tantrums. That he called up who was the guy who came up with the $8 billion thing?
Upton.
Yeah, Fred Upton of Michigan. That's right. He called up Upton and in a 10-minute conversation with him was screaming obscenities at him over the phone, and and telling him that his political career was over, and that prompted Upton to come up with the $8 billion so-called fix. The reality is it's going to probably cost at least $30 billion a year, not $8 billion over 10 years, if you're going to fund high-risk pools. And even then, you could be looking at people having to spend $100,000 a year for health insurance if they have a pre-existing condition that's serious, like metastatic cancer, for example.
Yeah, I think, too, I mean, it's interesting that you're right. I think most Republicans didn't like the bill, but they obviously passed it anyway. There's on top of that, there's the embarrassment of there not being a CBO score. There's the embarrassment of many of them not really even having time to read it or even know what it is. And it seems like it all came down to what can we do to help President Trump out. There's this clip that's from Paul Ryan, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, that's really taken off online where he himself is saying, look, like we shouldn't in the House be passing bills we don't know how much they cost that we haven't seen yet. And of course, that's exactly what they did. I think one thing that'll be interesting looking forward, besides sort of how the Senate will, I think, fairly radically rewrite this bill. But as you know, there are 2 House races coming up in the next few months. One in Georgia's 6th district to fill Tom Price's seat, and then the Montana seat. I don't know how much this healthcare vote will play into those races, but I have to imagine. You saw how energized the base was in response to this bill passing. Democrats almost not being giddy about it in terms of its bad policy, but really aware of how this is going to play out for Republicans across the country. And so I think that there's no doubt that this stuff's going to play a role in those 2 races coming up.
Yeah. And I would caution Democrats against celebrating too much too fast, though, because Fox News is not reporting any of the stuff that you and I just discussed. Right-wing talk radio is not going to be discussing any of the stuff that you and I just discussed. When Juan Williams tried to speak those truths yesterday on the 5, he got shouted down. They literally would not let him finish a sentence. There are a lot of people who are living in that right-wing bubble who think that Donald Trump just had a massive triumph yesterday, that everything is going to be great. And as they continue to have their Obamacare policies, they're going to assume that all the benefits of those policies are there as a result of the Republicans. So, be careful, Democrats.
Right. And I think one good example of that is the moment when the bill passed and Democrats begin singing "Na na 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 goodbye."
Yeah.
Republicans, to me, I don't know what your opinion is on that. That struck me as like a good act of civic activism, and I would say the same thing if Republicans did it. Sticking up for what you believe, knowing that the opposition did something bad that they're going to pay for. And yet, that clip, when I first saw it, I thought that was compelling. And then when you poke around online, it very much seems like it's getting treated as
they're behaving like children.
I don't know. What was your take on that?
I think that they should have shouted shame, frankly.
Yeah, right.
I think that would have made a lot more sense. The nah stuff, I don't think that hurts. I don't think that helps the Democrats at all. In fact, I think it hurts them.
Right,
but
and I think it speaks
just my take
to
on
them
it.
talking about winning elections and not winning actually good policy. That's a good point.
Yeah. So what else is going on in the world, Patrick?
One other update that's just coming out today. President Donald Trump's fiscal 2018 budget, we're now seeing, will now cut about 95% of the funding for the Office of National Drug Control Policy. What's interesting, really, in a large way about that is that's the lead agency in charge of combating the opioid crisis and other drug epidemics in this country, which is sort of interesting because fighting the opioid crisis is one of these topics that has gained a lot in popularity. There's a new documentary out on HBO. Senator Rob Portman, a lot of folks are behind this. Now, granted, Trump doesn't control the purse strings; Congress does. But it's pretty shocking that there's been a lot of consensus, I think, in the drug epidemic community about new research about how to fight the opioid crisis, about how to treat heroin addicts, et cetera, et cetera. And so the idea that at this time, when there seems to be a lot of momentum towards that issue, that Trump would trim that budget by about 95%, I think it's a real shocker, and I think actually won't be received well on Capitol Hill.
That's interesting, and it certainly won't be received well in the rural parts, the relatively poor rural parts of America, largely white America, that's suffering from this opiate crisis. Remarkable. Right. Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Thank you, Patrick.
You bet. Take care.
Good talking with you. Thank you. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Prophet's Way, A Guide to Living in the Now, which is largely my autobiography, essentially, a spiritual autobiography. This is from page 68, the chapter Changing the World by Changing Ourselves. The summer I lived in a teepee, I thought a great deal about the monastic experience. I'd read Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross and several books by Thomas Merton. And throughout my life had been drawn to the idea of solitude as a way of speeding up spiritual experience and growth. And that had certainly been my experience in my semi-monastic summer. I received knowledge and insights that I doubt I could have gotten any other way. Before I went into the forest and lived in that teepee, I'd always considered the monastic experience to be both intensely personal and intensely selfish. A monk, I thought, was a person working on himself and only affecting him or herself. But that summer, I realized that my spiritual practice was having an effect on the world. I could feel it. It was as if the world itself had a particular vibration made up of the buzz of all the life upon and within it. And when I was peaceful, it made the world a bit more peaceful. When I was agitated, the world became more agitated. My conclusion from this admittedly subjective experience was that I really was affecting the world, that monks are spiritual warriors and that monasteries are places from which powerful beams of positive spiritual energy fan out from the men and women in them to transform and help the world. While not so common among the writings of contemporary monks, this view was clearly held by those people who chose the monastic life in the centuries and millennia preceding the last 100 years or so. And so I worked at making myself more pure so I could add purity to the world. But throughout this, there was also part of me that thought that this was a subjective experience, perhaps with no objective reality. It seemed on that level that it wasn't possible that I could be so closely connected to the world, that I could have any significant impact on it just by my state of being at any particular moment or throughout my life. Because it was me experiencing the world, then of course the world would change as I changed. My point of view was shifting or being contaminated by my own mental state at the moment. This assumption was the result of my training in science. Science is something unique to those cultures who were influenced by the Greeks or the Persians. In India, Chinese, and Native American cultures, there is no equivalent. They have philosophy and spirituality, which integrate what we call science with what we call mysticism. But in their classic traditions, they don't have what we would refer to as pure science. Two of the primary tenets of science are the things that things are ultimately divisible into tiny, definable building blocks, and then for there to be a true reality, the observer must be separate from the observed. In our dreams, we're both observer and observed. It's unreal. In daily life, we're the observer, and the things around us, separate from us, are the observed. So we think of them as real. In this worldview, the entire universe can be separated into pieces, the first and primary division being that of observer and observed, subjective and objective. Science believed, and Aristotle and Descartes and others taught, that if the subjective observer could rid himself of his personal and instrumentational subjectivity and identify all the relevant factors, then a truly objective truth about the world and reality could be seen, measured, and determined. This belief, accepted as an absolute truth and the underpinning of our modern culture, led to viewing humankind as separate from the natural world. The classic question, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it as a sound made, assumes that nobody there to hear it means a human. Only humans, so the story went, were capable of classifying and separating things, breaking them into pieces, as Aristotle taught us, and understanding their separate meanings. Only humans would recognize sound as sound. But as science divided matter into smaller and smaller pieces, a disturbing trend began to emerge. It was found that supposedly inanimate matter seemed to be affected by the act of observing. The first response to this was Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which stated that things were constantly in a state of flux. And so if anything were observed at any moment, by the time the observation itself was made, things had already changed. Therefore, it was impossible to ever truly and absolutely observe anything. Because by the time we'd registered the observation, by the time the photons of light had hit the retina of our eye, the thing we were observing had already changed. It was also noted that the act of observing was not purely passive. With an electron microscope, for example, electrons are bounced off of or passed through things to produce an image for viewing. Similarly, a conventional microscope only works when photons of light bounce off the specimen and into your eye. Light and electrons are bits of matter or energy that could have a demonstrable effect on the things being observed, further increasing the certainty of the accuracy of the observation. Heisenberg went so far as to say that the exact location of anything in time and space could never be known, regardless of method or instrumentation. So it seemed we really couldn't know anything as an absolute and real state. All we could do is engineering, working with things because they work, like electricity, even though we don't know how or why they work, which is in fact the case with electricity. This allows us to manipulate the world around us, to build machines and make things work, but it also leads to the dangerous assumption that to be able to use something is to know it. This is mirrored in human nature, too. We're constantly affected by our experience of life, and our experiences change our personality, our worldview, and our behaviors. And I'm not now the person I was before I met Herr Mueller, nor am I now the same person I was even a week ago or even 1 minute ago. We grow, change, and are constantly in a state of flux, and this provides us with an opportunity to develop the spiritual sides of ourselves, and by doing this, to make the entire planet more spiritual. So this aspect of the scientific approach turned out to be wrong. It was, in fact, not possible to separate the observer from the observed. The book is The Prophet's Way.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It is Anything Goes Friday. I wanted to share a couple things with you, though, before I get back to picking up your phone calls. The first is Marty Kurzfeld, a friend. He's a writer out in Los Angeles and does some just great work. He says, this is tongue-in-cheek, right? Vice President Pence had a couple of suggestions, in case Trump Care passes. One, maybe it'd be a good idea to say, stop throwing away expired pharmaceutical prescriptions, right? Save money on drugs. And two, the next time you get sick, think about borrowing your neighbor's French poodle and taking it in to see the veterinarian and ascribing your symptoms to the dog, right? Because veterinarians cost less and veterinary medicines are cheaper. Great one, Marty. Thank you. Yeah, that was there. That was that. There is a draft Robert Reich to run for the United States Senate, and I'm guessing this is because Senator Feinstein may decide she's aggressively fundraising but waffling in the press, and whether or not Dianne Feinstein is going to run for re-election. I think if Robert Reich was to say, hey, if she chooses not to run, I'm going to run. I personally would do, I'm one of Robert Reich's biggest supporters. I think this guy is an absolute genius. He's the real thing. He's the real article. And there's a website now, draftrobert.org. There's a Facebook page, Draft Robert Reich. R-E-I-C-H. There's a Twitter handle, @DraftRBReich, and there's a hashtag, #RunRobertRun. So I just got this email from the Draft Robert team, and I'm guessing you can get on their email list by emailing to draftrobert2018@gmail.com. That's the email. But draftrobert.org is also the website. You can get over there and check that out. Meanwhile, there's a new website out that was put together by Joel Salisbury. He's a college student in Washington, D.C., and he has insurance thanks to the Affordable Care Act. But, Zoe Salisbury, and it's a she, This article by Ryan Grenoble in the Huffington Post, she said she watched in horror Thursday as House Republicans passed an Obamacare repeal bill called the American Health Care Act, either unaware their legislation would kill people or simply unsympathetic enough to care. And make no bones about it, by the way. If the bill that the Republicans passed yesterday that Donald Trump was crowing about passed, tens of thousands of Americans every year would die, who will not die right now because of the expansion of Medicaid and because of Obamacare. So anyhow, she created a website called mailmetothegop.com, a website that pledges to send the ashes of your cremated body to a member of Congress should you die because of the Republican health plan. Now, the National Funeral Directors Association helpfully points out it's illegal to ship your ashes via any method except the U.S. Postal Service. So you want to be sure to leave the instructions in your will that, if you die as a result of the Republican or healthcare policies, mailmetothegop.com is the website, and you too can have your ashes end up in Paul Ryan's desk. Thanks, Paul. Paul, by the way, this Jonathan Cohen writing over at Huffington Post. Paul Ryan was right. This was a defining moment for the Republican Party. Yeah, it was. The major changes to the Affordable Health Care, or the American Health Care Act. See, the Republicans, they're so slick at this big lie technique that I started the program out with. So they know that everybody loves the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. So they label their repeal and replace bill, and it's not replacing it, it's simply repealing it. They label it the the AHCA, so as to basically confuse people. I mean, it's like, George W. Bush calling it the Clean Skies Initiative that allows more pollution in the air, or the Healthy Forests Initiative that allows clear cutting. This is Orwellian use of language that the Republicans mastered, back in the Nixon administration when he said, I got a secret plan to end Vietnam, which he didn't. It was a lie. Ronald Reagan, I'm going to, fix Social Security, and we're not going to raise the retirement age. Guess what? If you retire, in the next couple of years, you got to be 67. You're going to have to work till you're 67, not 65. Reagan did that. He made Social Security income taxable. It was not taxable before Reagan came along. He changed the rules for executive compensation so the CEOs had an incentive to ruin their companies and destroy their workers. He changed the way that pensions had to be booked from liabilities to assets, so that suddenly companies were being bought and sold just to so greedy speculators could get their hands on the pension funds and bankrupt them, screwing the pension holders and throwing those responsibilities on the Federal Pension Benefit Guarantee Association, I think it's called. So you and I now are paying for this. I mean, just all these things, and they all had these wonderful sounding names. But the changes to spending, we're talking about an $839 billion cut to Medicaid, a $663 billion elimination of subsidies and for premiums and out-of-pocket expenses, and a total net effect of nearly $1 trillion, $993 billion being ripped out of the middle class and given to the top 1% in the form of doing away with the 3.8% tax on capital gains. And I don't know the percentage, but there is a slight increase in the income tax on people who earn over, as I recall, $300,000 a year. So basically, it's the top 1%. They're going to get a huge tax cut if this Republican plan passes, to the tune of almost $1 trillion over a couple of decades. Actually, over a couple of decades, it'd be well over $1 trillion. And, all the rest of us get the shaft. So, George Lakoff comes out and says, don't underestimate Donald Trump. I think this is an important story. It's published over at berkeleyside.com. And it's rather, thoughtful and long, as stuff by or about George Lakoff tends to be. But Lakoff says Trump is not stupid. He is a super salesman, and he knows how to change your brain and use it to his advantage. Lakoff, by the way, a year in advance predicted that Donald Trump would win with 47% of the vote. Trump got 46%. Lakoff even told Hillary Clinton's campaign and PAC staffers how to counteract Trump's message, but they couldn't hear him.
This is from the article. As far back as 2016, Lakoff saw the writing on the wall. He wrote, quote, "A dark cloud of authoritarianism looms over the nation. Radical conservatives have taken over the reins of government and have been controlling the terms of the political debate for many years." The progressives missed that too. So he's like, don't take this stuff for granted. It's time to get serious about this. Nigel, our webmaster, sent me an email. Our YouTube views, we've got a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Thom Hartmann. We just hit the 20 million mark in views, 20 million views of the videos of this program. That's pretty amazing. And thanks for the information on that, Nigel. And finally, I got my Financial Times weekly. Every Friday, they send you this Financial Times Newsmind thing. And volatility, that is concern about the stock market, is at a low that has not been seen since February of 2007. That should make you swallow hard. The S&P, the forward 12-month price-to-earning ratio sat at 17.6 times on Monday, near the highest level since 2004. Uh-oh. Are we looking at bubbles? And meanwhile, companies are starting to tighten their belt. The boards of companies listed on the S&P 500 have authorized $146 billion in share buybacks this year. I told you about how they do this just to jack up their stock prices so their CEOs can take on bigger paychecks. $146 billion is nothing to sneeze at, but it is the lowest pace in 5 years. With directors worried about extremely high valuations, the figure represents a decline of 15% from a comparable period last year, according to Goldman Sachs. And then there's a bunch of other, the U.S. rising trade deficit with Mexico. It hit a 10-year high, regardless of what Donald Trump is going to tell you. And rising growth in the Eurozone Manufacturing Center and in the UK Manufacturing Center. So it's there's some interesting economic news out there, too, that I wanted to share with you. So all that said, for the rest of the hour, we'll pick up your phone calls right after this. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Anything Goes for.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Russ, listening on X-Ray FM in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Russ, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, first, Tom, just as an aside, it's Monday, August 21st is the total solar eclipse, not June.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but what I really called about was back on January 3rd, the Republicans in the House, in the dead of night, as it were, made a rules change to value all public lands, all federal lands
at zero,
and buildings at zero.
Right.
And I think the reason they did this was so they could, what they're going to attempt in the near term is to give away all public lands to the states, counties, et cetera. And,
right. And when the CBO scores it, they're going to say, oh, it's nothing.
Well, I think the real reason they did this was so they could use budget reconciliation rules in the Senate and deprive the Democrats of the filibuster in the Senate.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on here. And people who live in Nevada and in Arizona need to contact Senator Heller, Nevada, Senator Flake, Arizona. They are going to be in tight races in 2018, and people need to get in touch with these guys and say, if you vote to give away our public lands, with the idea being that they will then be privatized,
right.
If you do this, you're not going to have my vote in 2018. There was a dress rehearsal for this back on March 25th of 2015, Amendment 838 to the then current budget bill. They actually voted on this giving away of public lands, and it passed 51-49 with one Republican, Cory Gardner of Colorado, voting against it. Wow. So if we can turn Flake and we can turn Heller, which is, I think, doable because I've done the research, and Heller won his seat in 2012 by 900 votes. I mean, it was razor thin. Wow. And Flake by 4%, so he did not exactly run away with it in 2012. These guys will listen to you on this issue. Also, they are going to be coming after.
Well, wait a minute. If they won races in 2012, they're not up for re-election until 2018. Yeah, okay. 6 + 2 is 8. Yeah. Pardon me, Russ. Yeah, back to you.
No, it's okay. One other thing, they are, in addition to this ridiculousness of giving away what is the birthright of every American bequeathed to us by the great President Theodore Roosevelt, not only are they going to try that, but they're also going after the Endangered Species Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. These are the two laws that the environmental attorneys use routinely in lawsuits to stop the timber industry from taking down the last little bit of native forest. We're down to 4% here in the state of Oregon, and they want that last 4%.
So call Senator Heller and call Senator Flake. The number for the Senate is 202-225-3121. Simply ask for their office. It'll patch you through. Is that right, Russ?
That's it.
Okay. Russ, thanks a lot, and thanks for listening to X-Ray FM in Portland. Love the station. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. Whatever you'd like to talk about. I've shared a few things that I wanted to talk about. And nobody has called to weigh in on whether or not Donald Trump is secretly a lizard person who zips on his human suit every day. You know, it is kind of looking a little saggy. You know, it could be that he's just kind of he's stretching, getting ready to molt. Oh, yeah. Chris has got it figured out. You a lizard person, Chris? Is that how you know? Molting hadn't even occurred to me, It's like, it's snakes molt. Do lizards? I guess lizards molt too, don't they? Is this something that's common for reptiles? Do people molt? Oh, do lizard people molt? Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Chris says he heard it from a friend. He doesnn't have personal experience with this. Okay. Yeah. We all believe you, Chris. Carolyn or Caroline. I'm not in Comstock Park, Michigan. How do I pronounce your name?
Carolyn.
Carolyn. What's up?
I live in the area where Betsy DeVos made their money, the Spectrum hospitals. My granddaughter was born with neuroblastoma, and the DeVos Hospital used her to find a process to take care of that. Right next door is the Van Andel Research, and that's the other half of the team that help make the money that the DeVosses have. They had the Amways in our area, and that's where they made the money.
Yeah. Wasn't her husband the heir to the Amway fortune, and she was the heir to another fortune?
Yeah, the Prince people.
Yeah, the Prince people, right. Yeah, because Eric Prince is her brother.
Yeah. Oh, aren't we happy around here?
Yeah.
But anyways, my granddaughter, my daughter signed a paper for the DeVosses to do research to find a process for neuroblastoma. She's been involved with doctors writing papers. Every once in a while, she tries to do something different that she has heard about to help my granddaughter, and we have to get involved with the local protective services for the county. There's priority health health insurance in our area, and that has to do with the DeVosses in some way. And I just had doctor's exam, and the doctor that came over to the house when I was complaining about the health care that's going on with the Republicans, and he let me know that I needed to appreciate the people that I live around. so I can be taken care of. Anyways, with my granddaughter with the insurance, she was promised insurance until she was 18 because of the research that they're doing. She's 7 now. The tumor that developed in her back has caused her problems walking, and she needs special shoes. They were told today or yesterday that they need to pay for these braces and shoes, and so they're starting to renege on the things that they had promised. I don't think that people realize, because of the power that they have, that we really are at their mercy. When they developed the Spectrum Hospital, all of a sudden the state universities came around so that they could be their programs, their medical programs could be part of the development for the doctors and the research.
This sounds like some sort of a feudal system, you know, where you all are the serfs on the property owned by the feudal lord, and the hospitals owned by the feudal lord. And aren't we generous to give you this? And don't speak ill of the billionaires who brought you this. And that's bizarre.
Yeah, it scared me when he did that. I'm trying to find another insurance, because when I said that, he was working on a computer, and I didn't know where he was going with that.
Yeah. So the doctor actually said, don't speak ill of the DeVosses?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, we have a lot of billionaires around here. We were really happy when they started developing things so that we could see growth come back into Grand Rapids.
Right.
Growing up, Grand Rapids is a really nice town. We were able to, our kids could go to college and stay in the area. Now that the DeVosses have decided to come into Grand Rapids, and Grand Rapids hasn't stopped their growth, the kids can't stay home. They've got to move out. And all the services that you get in the social services that you would get, you have to move out of town, and most people can't afford to come back and forth into Grand Rapids to get things like pantry food.
Is that just a function of gentrification, or is there some specific policy that the DeVos family is pursuing that's making this happen?
Well, they started that, and their publicity machine started getting involved in all of these programs where Grand Rapids would be considered number one. And so people were moving in, and they've overcome the population that has lived here all of our lives. The programs in Grand Rapids are saying it's a war on us for the housing.
Right.
So and they've gotten involved with the state, so there's no rent control. And we've tried to fight it, but it's really hard.
Yeah. So it sounds like the DeVos family, by throwing their money around in Grand Rapids, is stimulating the economy in a way that is producing the gentrification effect, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. That's remarkable. Carolyn, thanks for the heads up about the town that I was born in. I was born in Grand Rapids at Kent County Hospital. Carolyn, thanks for the information. I appreciate it. Wonder if Kent County Hospital is even still around. Probably been bought by the DeVosses. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls on your topic du jour right after this. Hi, it's the Thom Hartmann Book Club with the Thom Hartmann University, and today we're reading from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. I'm reading from the preface. This is page XIII. The world right now is tottering atop three major thresholds. An environment, that is so afire that it may soon no longer be able to support human life. An economic free market system that is almost entirely owned, run, and milked by a tiny fraction of 1% of us and has crashed and in many ways is burning around us.
and an explosion of human flesh on the planet that has turned our species into a global petri dish just waiting for an effective agent to run amok. 4 mistakes have brought us to this point, and the failure to recognize them at their deepest level will only push us faster toward total tipping points where we are thrown over the 3 thresholds and into disaster. All 4 of these mistakes are grounded in our culture, our way of thinking, our way of seeing the world, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and why we're here. The first mistake is a belief that we're separate from nature. Our religions tell us that we were created by a supernatural being who is not part of this earth and not from this planet. He set us apart from all other life, and many among us, perhaps even the majority of the 6 billion of us, roughly 7 billion now, don't even believe that we are animals, but instead think we're a totally unique life form. The second mistake is a belief that an abstraction, an economic system, is divine and separate from us. This mythical so-called free market, so we believe, operates under its own divine rules and is entirely and eternally self-regulating. It is always right. The fact that worldwide it's more than 95% owned and run by fewer than 0.00001% of us, it's just the way things are, always were, and always will be. We are here to serve the economy, this belief goes. It's not here to serve us. The third mistake is a belief that men should run the world and that women are their property. While it may seem that women's rights are well advanced and society is nearly egalitarian in the developed world, the United States, Western Europe, and Australia combined are only about a quarter of the population of the world. In India, it's still a common rural practice for men to burn their wives to death simply because it's more convenient than divorce. In many Arab countries and across much of Africa and South America, it's not uncommon for women to be murdered by their families if they dishonor the family by not going along with an arranged marriage or not being a virgin at time of marriage. Even in the first world, women are routinely excluded from positions of power in the world's largest institutions, such as the Catholic Church. This is one of our biggest mistakes, not just because it's morally deficient or because it can be biologically challenged, but because its primary result is an explosion in population. The fourth mistake is a belief that the best way to influence people is through fear rather than through the power of love, compassion, or support. We stand baffled when Palestinians in Gaza vote for a political party that has a long history of terrorist activity, somehow completely overlooking the fact that that same group has been feeding people, building schools and hospitals, and providing old age and widow pensions to people in need. We think we can threaten and bomb people into liking us and behaving in ways consistent with our best interests while ignoring their own best interests. We have come to believe that we are not our brother's keeper, that we are separate from all other humanity on the planet, and in all that, we are mistaken. Civilizations have come and gone, and those long gone vanished mostly because they despoiled their commons, allowed small elites to control their economies and governments, and lived in ways that were unsustainable. Those who survive for centuries or millennia are the ones that learned how to protect their commons, engage in non-toxic commerce and governance, and organize their cultures and lifestyles in ways that could continue in the same place and the same way down through the ages. If we don't learn the lessons of the latter, we shall face the fate of the former. And just a little bit from the first chapter. This is titled Darfur, and on the border with Darfur, Sudan, March 16th, 2008. It's late morning, and I'm sitting on the dirt ground typing it into an old AA battery-operated pocket word processor, a Zorus ZR5000, in part because the nearest electricity is over 500 miles away. So is the nearest paved road and the nearest building made with anything other than mud or grass. This is Gok Machar, southern Sudan, just a few miles from the border with Darfur, a village that's swelled from 8,000 people to more than 45,000 as refugees flee the bombings and murders take place as I type these words just 50 miles to the northwest. About 300 people arrived just this morning, most with nothing more than the clothes they were wearing, many with stories of relatives who died along the way as they fled or before the UN could transport them here. When we first arrived on the African continent, we looked out onto the nighttime savannah beyond our Nairobi hotel, and it was truly a startling sight, one I'd almost forgotten since my last visit to Kenya back in 1982. The landscape is huge, horizon to horizon, like the movies you see of these parts of Africa. The land here in South Sudan is just as vast and flat. The 45,000 people around me share one single hand-pumped well, drilled a decade ago by the UN. and no other infrastructure beyond that. No buildings, no roads, no septic tank or sewer system, no schools, no clinics, no hospitals, no stores, or even storehouses. Nothing. The book is Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just reading the comments on the article that I wrote for Alternet today. It's there's one that I thought was pretty good. This is an article I wrote that this is all about tax cuts for billionaires. The so-called health care bill that was passed yesterday. That's all that it's about. That's really the only thing. And Palimpsestuous writes, I predict that virtually no one, he says, I think Tom's critique is right on and will be ignored by pretty much everyone because it involves looking at the political fight from the Republican perspective. I predict virtually no one will take up the 15% tax increase on billionaires. It's actually almost a 20% tax increase put into place by Obama as the cause of repeal and replace. It must drive Tom Batty to be in a position with both a public platform and truly penetrating insight, yet be treated like Henny Penny by almost everyone. This is the first I've ever read anywhere about the 15% tax increase on billionaires as motivation for repeal and replace for the ACHA. I read pretty widely and daily, but Tom's the first. Thank you for that. And there's a vigorous discussion going on. The article is titled, Republicans' Vicious and Immoral Health Care Bill is Just Part of a Sinister Long Game. And it's over at the top of alternet.org right now if you want to check it out. I think it's a pretty important one that needs to be shared far and wide. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, thanks for calling. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I'm just going to ask you this because I know you're kind of interested in stuff like this. There's a study that was put out by Thomas DeMare, and it's about hominids or tool-making hominids in the Americas. The site's actually in Southern California. 100,000 years ago.
Yeah, I read the study.
And yeah, oh, you read the study. So see, you know,
well, I read the summary of the study.
An article about the study, and I saw an article about the criticism from his peers.
Right.
But my question to you is this, because here's what I didn't see as a criticism: is it possible that we're putting too much weight on the tool making capability of our ancient ancestors? Like perhaps the tool making capability was pre-hominid or pre-Homo sapien.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Dave, that you say that, because last night over at the TV studio, Brian, the floor director, he and I were talking before we went on the air, and he says, "Have you seen this thing about humans being on North America 105,000 years ago?" And I was like, yeah, I read the summary of it in Nature, as I recall, and I said they found no human remains whatsoever. There's no actual evidence of humans. There's only evidence of what might be considered human activity, that is tool making activity. And I said, crows use tools. They use sticks to get into places. There's all kinds of animals that use tools. Frankly, there's from lemurs or lemurs, however you say it, Lemurs, which are primates, only little tiny ones, kind of the great grandfathers of all of us, through the kind of monkeys. I was in Costa Rica a couple of weeks ago, and there's monkeys in the jungle there. There may well have been small monkeys or even larger ones in Southern California 105,000 years ago. And we just competed them out of the ecosystem when we took over, or climate changed slightly and they moved or whatever. I'm not convinced that this is evidence of humans. I'm on the side of the skeptics, frankly, from having read the summary of the study and having read several of the critiques of the study, and that was my point to Brian was hey, there's we're not the only tool makers. Tool users or tool makers out there. There's lots of animals, and we don't even know about animals that might have gone extinct during the Pleistocene as a result of all this. The whole what's the arrowhead type?
Clovis.
Yeah, Clovis Man. Thank you very much. Yeah, the whole Clovis Man theory, you know, that they found those arrowheads, and that was the dating for 22,000 years ago. That Clovis Man may have driven extinct an animal that was a very sophisticated tool maker or tool user, and you know, it might have even been like a three-toed sloth or something. Although that's probably less likely. I think that probably some primate or some variation on a primate with an opposable thumb is probably more likely. But yeah. I agree with you, Dave. I think your analysis is spot on. So
I agree, Tom. Well, you gave me some new stuff to think about, though. Hey, I appreciate it.
Okay, good talking to you. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening on Sirius XM. Kurt in Los Angeles. Hey, Kurt, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, Kurt. I hope you are too.
Well, yeah, it started off pretty well, but I actually became a quite bit distraught when I heard the news blurb that you did about the protester of the Ferguson
the third Ferguson protester
in his car, and it's the same MO as two other protesters over the past 2 years that have also been found dead in the same manner.
Yeah.
And it got me to thinking.
This looks to me like assassinations, and if the assassinations are being done by people in authority in Ferguson, the feds should be in there tomorrow morning.
Oh, that's good that the feds will be in there.
No, they should be, I'm saying. Under Jeff Sessions, I don't think they will be.
Sessions declined to get involved with the Alton Sterling case, so I don't know how far this will go. But I wanted to ask you, sir, are you familiar with Medgar Evers?
Yeah, and there's a piece out I saw on my Twitter feed that what's his name, who now has apparently confessed to killing him?
Oh, well, Byron Della Beckwith is the one who's
Byron Della.
Trial.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, he's on trial. Okay.
About a year ago, when I was doing some research on the Ku Klux Klan, because I wanted to figure out what was going on with this Trump presidency, I discovered a documentary that stated that Medgar Evers was only one of actually 3 civil rights leaders that were actually targeted for murder on the night he was shot. It was just that Medgar Evers was more well known, and it made the news. But there were 2 other black civil rights activists who were shot on that same night in other cities, and they were committed by the White Citizens Council.
Right.
Are you familiar with that group?
I am.
Yeah, so Byron Della Beckwith was a member of the White Citizens Council, and I know that they have been revived in recent years after President Obama had become in the office. And so I'm very concerned that now that we have a person like Jeff Sessions in office, it's pretty much open season on Negroes right now.
It seems. Black people, the whole Jeff side. You know what, Kurt? One of the people, my writing partner, Lamar Waldron, he and I worked on these books on the Kennedy assassination, is like super aware of these kind of situations, particularly in the South. He lives in Atlanta, and I need to get him on this program in the next week or 2 or 3, and to talk about, because he's an expert on Byron Della Beckwith and just that whole era and what's going on in the South, and a lot of it actually has made its way into some of the books that Lamar has written, and so thanks for the reminder on that.
Thank you, Tom.
Appreciate the call.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you very much. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, back on the police killings of private citizens, I'd like people to think about 2 things, because almost every shooting has one or both of these things in common. First, it's the police going, gee gosh, I'm not sure. I thought maybe he was reaching for a gun. I thought maybe he was going to do X, Y, Z. Okay, and so what they're talking about is doubt of intent. Well, that's called doubt. Well, in my mind, the citizens are always entitled to the benefit of the doubt, not the officer, the citizen. And by the way, as a retired Coast Guard officer, I had to undergo situational shooting, and anytime we could not clearly identify a threat, it was considered a bad shoot, because our trainer said, with a loaded weapon pointed at a potential perp, you always have enough time to shoot them before they can possibly pull out a gun or a knife or run 15 feet and kill you. So number one is benefit of the doubt. The police have taken that, and we should never have allowed that. Number two, case after case, I'm seeing police putting themselves, creating a dangerous situation, and then killing somebody. Here in Portland, the police, he tried to reach into a woman's, a few years ago, he tried to reach into a woman's car and pull the keys out because she had a warrant out for traffic tickets and failure to appear. So he literally tried to reach into her car and take her keys out. At some point, while he was leaning all the way inside of her vehicle, she started, she hit the gas inadvertently or whatever, and he killed her because she was, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He put himself in harm's way. They're taking the benefit of the doubt. If nothing else, you know what, if we're not going to indict and prosecute and convict these people, I don't want them on the force anymore. They have shown bad judgment. And the fact that we keep acquitting these people and returning them back into the field terrifies me. The worst, absolutely the worst management in the history of...
I agree, Bill. We need national policing standards in the United States, and we need to have appropriate pay and appropriate educational requirements and psychological testing requirements. And this is not a radical idea. You have this in Canada. You have it in, to the best of my knowledge, every European country. And their rates of police killings, I mean, the police have killed almost 200 people so far this year. Their rates of police killings are much lower than ours.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls after this. It's Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Patrick in Seaside, California. Hey, Patrick, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I actually had two questions for you. One was about one of your books, and the other was about the DNC trial. First of all, I spoke to your call screener, and he found copies for 99 cents on Amazon, but for the last couple of months, I cannot find a copy of The Last Hours of Humanity for under almost $200. Right now, there's 5 offers ranging from $194.99 up to $690.78.
Are you on a book collector's site or something?
No, I'm on Amazon. Only 5 offers, and they run from good to like new. They don't even have new copies. They have 5 offers from $194.99 to $690.78. For The Last Hours of Ancient Humanity. Can we order your books off of your website?
No, hang on just a second. I'm on Amazon right now, and I'm looking at this. And Last Hours of Humanity, the paperback. Whoa, paperback from $149? You're right. The Kindle version is 99 cents. I got to talk to my publisher.
Copy or a hardcover.
Yeah, there's 5 used copies. They started at $194. It never came out in hardcover. It only came out in paperback. That's amazing. It's apparently my publisher has taken the book out of print, and nobody told me. So thanks for the heads up on that. I think we can get this book back into print really fast.
I wanted to give you that heads up right away, although it's like I said, it's been a month or two, and I keep checking, and I'm like, I can't believe I can't find something under $195.
Yeah.
I mean, I love your books, Tom, but,
that's a crazy price.
I have a limited income here.
Yeah, no, it's a crazy price. No, the book should be in print, and in fact, well, I'm going to call my agent this afternoon and just find out what the heck is going on. This book should be available, and I was never notified that it was going out of print, so...
My second point and question is, I know you don't want to relitigate the 2016 election. Just have to say one thing. I think the Democrats ran a horrible campaign. A horrible candidate. I know she won 3 million, mostly in the West Coast popular vote. But if you can't crush Donald Trump in the popular and the Electoral College, you are a horrible candidate. And I think the evidence is overwhelming from the Stanford University study and WikiLeaks that they stole the primary from Bernie Sanders. And I wanted to know if you had any information on the ongoing DNC trial. I don't know if it's treasonous, and I'm not saying it should be punishable by death, but at least 20 years in prison, I think. Shouldn't tampering with our elections be considered treasonous? And I'm talking about not just the DNC monkey wrenching their own primary, but the Republican Party's cross-check program. I think if you tamper with our elections, to me, that should be treasonous.
I think that it's a strong argument for a constitutional amendment that establishes a national right to vote, and which we don't have. As Rehnquist wrote in the decision Bush v. Gore, there is no affirmative right to vote in the Constitution. And rights to votes have been added specifically for freed slaves and later for women. But there is no right to vote in general, and that needs to be added to the Constitution. With regard to the trial, I haven't been keeping track of it. I've seen a few headlines here and there. I haven't been paying that much attention. And with regard to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, I think that you really need to check out this piece by George Lakoff on Trump. Hey, thanks so much to our show director, Louise Hartman, to my executive producer, Sean Taylor, to our video director, Chris Mendelis, to our radio and TV producer, Troy Miller, to our phone screener and associate producer, Nate Atwell, to our writer-researcher, Nate Sweet, to our webmasters, Nigel Peacock and Jamie Holly, to our business manager, Ron Hartenbaum, to everyone at our syndicators, Digital Media, Pacific Love Radio, SiriusXM Satellite Radio, Cable Radio Network, Free Speech TV on Dish Network, DirecTV, and all the cable companies, providers that carry our show, including Manhattan Neighborhood Network. We're now in every home in Manhattan. Tell your friends. And all the others around the country, to all the great folks at Free Speech TV and RTTV who work on the big picture, to the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn, to Netroots Radio, to our newsletter editor, Sue Nethercutt, and the folks in our chat room. Hey, how are you? To Ellen Ratner, Victoria Jones, Bob Ney, and everyone at Talk Media News, to Jay Goodman-Tamboli for tech support, to our affiliates, our sponsors, and to you for supporting our program. And there's a new way to support our program now over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, just an FYI. YouTube has been radically cutting back the revenue on YouTube views, the advertising revenue on YouTube views for political shows. And a number of them, David Pakman's show, The Young Turks, a number of them are taking huge hits. We took a huge hit, more than half of our revenue, lost more than half of our revenue, which keeps this show going. And so we created a site over at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann for people who want to support the program, just an FYI. And there's, goodies and stuff associated with that. Anyhow, Noel in Riverside, California. Hey, Noel, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm getting ready for my taco salad today for Cinco de Mayo.
Oh, yeah. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Everyone. You're talking about Trump and the lizard people. With the chemtrails and Fukushima and the GMO foods, it makes me think, why don't these people who are doing this think it's going to ever affect them? And then it takes me back to this 1988 John Carpenter movie, They Live, where he runs across this kind of conspiracy and he picks up these sunglasses and it shows them like maybe a quarter of the people are like alien demons living in society.
Oh, I remember a Twilight Zone episode like that. I'm not sure I ever saw the movie, but
oh, it is so good. And for some reason I have a notebook I put, this is close to real, and I don't know where I got that reference from, but it's, and then John Carper, I've seen his write-up on it, and he goes, this is like representing the corporate like overlords, and they had subliminal messages on everything: submit, obey, consume. Like the people were being brainwashed into this. And also, I wanted to mention there's a good pastor in Chicago, Illinois. He's black, and he is on fire because he had somebody shot in his congregation, and he talks about, you don't have to give up your protest and all your, and, this and that. But he's just talking about, it's nice to know, you have angels around you and you don't have to live in fear, if you're close to God, because we have overcome the world. We are not supposed to be under subjection. So he puts out an excellent message every Sunday. He's from Chicago. And God, thank you, Tom, for your work.
Great. Thank you, Noel. Great collection of topics there. Ray in McHenry, Illinois. Hey, Ray, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I wanted to offer two or suggest two different ways to talk about health care. On MSNBC yesterday, Joe Walsh summarized a big obstacle to single payer when he said, I don't want to pay for someone else's health care.
Wait a minute, you're talking about deadbeat dad Joe Walsh, the former congressman who refused to pay child support?
Flack for it, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the real problem with our system is that some try to use it to get rich, and then they use Joe and other people's resentment to trick them into fighting against single payer and supporting private.
Right.
So what I would suggest is, one, stop debating whether it's a right or not. It just triggers a knee-jerk reaction in those people. Simply ask them, do you want anyone, including children, to be denied the best possible care simply because they or their parents can't afford it? And the second thing I think is really important is start using the term social insurance instead of single payer. You know, everybody already knows how insurance works and accepts the way it does. People already pay huge sums of money for private health, car, home, life insurance, and they never get that amount back in benefits unless they have a really bad year. And what they contribute goes to pay for others who had bad years, and they know that, and they don't mind it because theoretically they'll be covered if they have that same kind of bad year. Right. So once we point out those parallels between social and private insurance, then it's a simple matter of pointing out the differences, and that's one, social insurance like Medicare, like you always say, the goal is to provide a service, the operating cost of 3%. That means 97% of what we pay in goes to care.
Yeah.
Private insurance, the goal is profit. Bottom line.
Yeah. No, private.
Providing a service, and only 80% goes to pay. This is nothing you've heard about lately on the news. Only 80% goes to pay for care now with the ACA, and if they eliminate that, they can take as much as they want for profit.
Like they used to. Yeah, I agree, Ray. I would add a third thing. I would say, and this I think is the way to get to the Republicans. It's a national security issue. If Kim Jong-un decides that he wants to really seriously mess with the United States, all he has to do is get an infiltrator into this country with a little tiny vial that could easily slip through customs anywhere, filled with, for example, smallpox. And, I mean, we don't even vaccinate against smallpox anymore because it's been eliminated from the earth. Or a virulent strain of polio. Or, there's dozens of diseases, right, that could be unleashed in the United States. And because we don't have a national health care system, there are a lot of people who would come down with the symptoms, but they wouldn't get treatment immediately. And they would then infect lots and lots of other people. And this is why we have to have, A, a national health care system, and B, sick time, paid sick time, because some of those people may be working in restaurants and serving you food as they're spreading smallpox to you. Every other developed country in the world has, as part of their national health care system, it is also part of their national defense system against biowarfare or simply crap happens. Somebody, like right now, I've got this amazing article from the BBC titled Long Dormant, the diseases hidden in ice are waking up. Long dormant bacteria and viruses trapped in ice and permafrost for centuries are reviving as Earth's climate warms. And they're talking about all these bodies up in the north, in the northern part of Europe and Russia and Alaska, but old bodies that are being unearthed as the permafrost melts, that they have identified some of them who positively died of and still have active H9N5 virus, I think it is the flu that killed so many people in 1919, and others who have smallpox or who had smallpox. And these diseases could come back, and we have no defense against it if a third of our population isn't in a system. So, Ray, there's a lot of good reasons for this. Ray, thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for listening to WCPT. And thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back next week. And don't forget, in the meantime, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. See you next week.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.